Some think that love, strong, true, and self-sacrificing, is not to be found in the Orient. But the story of Karan, which comes down 400 years and more, proves the contrary, for it still has the fresh, sweet flavor of a romance of yesterday, albeit the setting of the East provides an odd and interesting background. In the days of King Seongjong, AD 1488 to 1495, one of Korea's noted men became governor of Pyongan province. Pyongan stands first among the 8 provinces in terms of erudition and polite society. Many of its literati are accomplished musicians and show a keen ability in state affairs. At the time of this story, there was a famous dancing girl in Pyongan named Charan. She was very beautiful and captivated audiences with her singing and dancing. Her talents were exceptional. She understood the classics and was well-versed in history. Karan was renowned as the brightest of all the geisha, celebrated far and wide. The governor's family included a son, aged 16, with a face as comely as a picture. Despite his youth, he was well-versed in Chinese and a gifted scholar. His judgment was excellent, and he had a fine appreciation for literary form, so that the moment he lifted his pen, the written line took on admirable expression. Known as Kidong, the gifted lad, his name became famous. The governor, having no other children, cherished this son deeply. On Kidong's birthday, all the officials and special guests were invited to celebrate. There were also a company of dancing girls and a large band of musicians. During a lull in the banquet, the governor called his son and ordered the chief of the dancing girls to choose the prettiest among them to dance with Kidong and entertain the guests. The company unanimously called for Karan, as she was the one most suited by her talents, attainments, and age. Karan and Kidong danced together gracefully, captivating everyone with their performance. The governor, pleased with the display, called Charan to sit on the dais, treated her to a share of the banquet, gave her a present of silk, and commanded that she be the special dancing maiden to attend to his son from that day forth. From this birthday onward, Charan and Kidong became fast friends. They thought the world of each other. Their love became more enchanting than any delightful story in history. When the governor's term was extended for 6 more years, they continued to live in the North Country. Eventually, when it was time to return, the governor and his wife were greatly anxious about separating their son from Karan. They feared he might suffer greatly if forced to part from her. However, taking her with them, considering she was not his wife, could harm his reputation. They were unable to decide and referred the matter to their son. They said, "Even parents cannot decide as to the love of their son for a maiden. What ought we to do? You love Karan dearly and parting will be difficult. Yet, keeping a dancing girl before marriage is not proper and could interfere with your marriage prospects and future. However, the custom of having a second wife is accepted in Korea. Do as you think best in the matter." Kidong replied, "There is no difficulty. When she is before my eyes, of course, she is everything. But when the time comes for me to start for home, she will be like a pair of worn shoes set aside, so please do not be anxious." The governor and his wife were greatly delighted and said he was a superior man indeed. When the time came to part, Karan cried bitterly, so that those standing by could not bear to look at her, but the son showed not the slightest sign of emotion. Those looking on were filled with wonder at his fortitude. Although he had already loved Karan for 6 years, he had never been separated from her for a single day, so he knew not what it meant to say goodbye, nor did he know how it felt to be parted. The governor returned to Seoul to fill the office of Chief Justice, and the son came also. After this return, thoughts of love for Karan possessed Kidong, though he never expressed them in word or manner. It was almost the time of the KAMC examination. The father, therefore, ordered his son to go with some of his friends to a neighboring monastery to study and prepare. They went, and one night, after the day's work was over and all were asleep, the young man stole out into the courtyard. It was winter, with frost and snow and a cold, clear moon. The mountains were deep, and the world was quiet, so that the slightest sound could be heard. The young man looked up at the moon, and his thoughts were full of sorrow. He so wished to see Karan that he could no longer control himself, and fearing that he would lose his reason, he decided that very night to set out for far-distant Pyongan. He had on a fur headdress, a thick coat, a leather belt, and a heavy pair of shoes. When he had gone less than 10 li, however, his feet were blistered, and he had to go into a neighboring village and change his leather shoes for straw sandals and his expensive head cover for an ordinary servant's hat. He went thus on his way, begging as he went. He was often very hungry, and when night came, was very, very cold. He was a rich man's son and had always dressed in silk and eaten dainty fare, and had never in his life walked more than a few feet from his father's door. Now there lay before him a journey of hundreds of miles. He went stumbling along through the snow, making but poor progress. Hungry and frozen nearly to death, he had never known such suffering before. His clothes were torn, and his face became worn down and blackened till he looked like a goblin. Still on he went, little by little, day after day, till at last, when a whole month had gone by, he reached Pyongan. Straight to Charan's home he went, but Charan was not there, only her mother. She looked at him, but did not recognize him. He said he was the former governor's son, and that out of love for Charan he had walked 500 li. "Where is she?" he asked. The mother heard, but instead of being pleased, was very angry. She said, "My daughter is now with the son of the new governor, and I never see her at all. She never comes home, and she has been away for 2 or 3 months. Even though you have made this long journey, there is no possible way to meet her." She did not invite him in, so cold was her welcome. He thought to himself, "I came to see Charan, but she is not here. Her mother refuses me. I cannot go back, and I cannot stay. What shall I do?" While thus in this dilemma, a plan occurred to him. There was a scribe in Pyongan who, during his father's term of office, had offended and was sentenced to death. There were extenuating circumstances, however, and he, when he went to pay his morning salutations, had besought and secured his pardon. His father, out of regard for his son's petition, had forgiven the scribe. He thought, "I was the means of saving the man's life. He will take me in." So he went straight from Charan's to the house of the scribe. But at first, this writer did not recognize him. When he gave his name and told who he was, the scribe gave a great start and fell at his feet, making obeisance. He cleared out an inner room and made him comfortable, prepared dainty fare, and treated him with all respect. A little later, he discussed with his host the possibility of meeting Charan. The scribe said, "I am afraid that there is no way for you to meet her alone, but if you would like to see even her face, I think I can manage it. Will you consent?" He asked about the plan. It was this. Since it was a time of snow, daily workers were called to sweep it away from the inner court of the governor's yamen, and just now the scribe was in charge of this particular work. He said, "If you join the sweepers, take a broom and go in. You will likely catch a glimpse of Charan, as she is said to be in the hill kiosk. I know of no other plan." Kidong consented. Early in the morning, he mingled with the company of sweepers and went with his broom into the inner enclosure, where the hill kiosk was, and they worked at sweeping. Just then, the governor's son was sitting by the open window, and Charan was with him, though not visible from the outside. The other workers, being experienced, swept well. Kidong alone handled his broom awkwardly, not knowing how to sweep. The governor's son, observing this, looked out and laughed, called Charan, and invited her to see this sweeper. Charan stepped out into the open hall, and the sweeper looked up to see. She glanced at him briefly, and then turned quickly, went back into the room and shut the door, not appearing again, to the sweeper's disappointment, who returned in despair to the scribe's house. Charan was first of all a wise and highly gifted woman. One look had told her who the sweeper was. She returned to the room and began to cry. The governor's son, surprised and displeased, asked, "Why do you cry?" She did not reply immediately, but after being asked repeatedly, explained, "I am of low status. You are mistaken in thinking highly of me or valuing me. I have not been home for over 2 months. This is a special honor, and I have no reason to complain. But I think of my home, which is poor, and my mother. It is customary on the anniversary of my father's death to prepare food from the official quarters and offer a sacrifice to his spirit. But here I am, and tomorrow is the sacrificial day. I fear that no act of devotion will be performed. This distresses me, and that's why I cry." The governor's son, moved by her words, trusted her completely and without question. Sympathetically, he asked, "Why didn't you tell me before?" He prepared the food and told her to hurry home and perform the ceremony. So Charan returned swiftly to her house and said to her mother, "Kidong has come, and I have seen him. Is he not here? Tell me where he is if you know." The mother replied, "He came here, it is true, all the way on foot to see you, but I told him that you were in the yamen and that there was no way for you to meet, so he went away, and where he is I do not know." Then Charan broke down and began to cry. "Oh, my mother, why did you do so cruelly?" she sobbed. "I can never break with him nor give him up. We were both 16 when chosen to dance together, and while it may be said that men chose us, it is truer still to say that fate chose us. We grew into each other's lives, and our love was unparalleled. Though he forgot and left me, I can never forget or give him up. The governor, too, called me the beloved wife of his son and did not once refer to my low status. He cherished me and gave me many gifts. It was like heaven. In the city of Pyongan, gentry and officials gather as men crowd into a boat. I have seen many, but none was ever like Kidong. I must find him, and even if he casts me aside, I will never forget him. I have not kept myself as I should have, because I have been under the power and influence of the governor. How could he have come so far for someone like me? He, a gentleman of the highest birth, for the sake of a humble dancing girl, has endured all this hardship and come so far. Could you not have thought, mother, of these things and given him at least some kindly welcome? Could my heart be other than broken?" Tears flowed from Charan's eyes as she pondered where he could be. "I know of no place," she thought, "unless it be at such and such a scribe's home." Quick as thought, she flew there, and they met. They embraced, tears streaming, without a word spoken. Together, they returned to Charan's home side by side. As night fell, Charan said, "When tomorrow comes, we shall have to part. What shall we do?" They discussed their options and decided to escape that night. Charan gathered her clothes, treasures, and jewels, making 2 bundles. He carried his on his back, and she carried hers on her head. They slipped away while the city slept. They followed the road leading toward the mountains between Yangtok and Maingsan counties. There they found a country house where the governor's son took on the role of a better-class servant. Although he lacked practical skills, Charan was adept at weaving and sewing, and thus they managed to live. After some time, they moved into a small thatched hut in the village and made it their home. Charan, a skilled seamstress, worked tirelessly day and night, selling her treasures and jewels to make ends meet. Charan also knew how to make friends and was admired and loved by all in the village. The villagers, touched by the hardships faced by this mysterious young couple, offered their support, and thus their days passed peacefully and happily together. To return to the story, in the morning, the friends who had gone to study with Kidong at the temple awoke to find him missing. The temple was in an uproar as they searched for the Chief Justice's son. They looked everywhere, but Kidong was nowhere to be found, and word was sent to his parents. The former governor's household was in great distress over such a significant loss. They scoured the area around the temple, but there was no sign of him. Some speculated that he had been lured away and transformed by a fox. Others feared he had been eaten by a tiger. Believing him dead, his parents mourned him and burned his clothing in a sacrificial fire. In Pyongan, the governor's son, upon realizing Charan was gone, had her mother and all her relatives imprisoned. However, after a futile month-long search, he released them and abandoned the matter. Charan, now content with her chosen one, said to him one day, "You, a son of the gentry, have given up your parents and home for the sake of a dancing girl to live in this secluded corner of the hills. This touches upon your filial duty, leaving your father and mother uncertain if you are alive or not. They should be informed. We cannot live here forever, and returning home seems impossible. What do you think we should do?" Kidong replied hopelessly, "I am distressed and know not." Charan responded brightly, "I have a plan that can help us move past our mistakes and create a new future. Through it, you can honor your parents and face the world with dignity. Will you agree?" "What do you propose?" he asked. Her answer was, "There is only one way, and that is through the official examination. I know of no other. You understand my meaning even if I do not elaborate." He said, "Your plan is perfect, but how can I obtain the necessary books?" Charan replied, "Don't be anxious about that. I'll get the books." From that day forth, she searched through all the neighborhood for books to be secured at all costs. However, being a mountain village, there were few or none. One day, unexpectedly, a pack peddler came by, carrying a bundle that included a book he wished to sell. Some villagers wanted to buy it for wallpaper, but Charon secured it first and showed it to Kidong. It turned out to be a special work for examinations, filled with numerous exercises written out. The book, written in small characters, was massive, containing several thousand exercises. Kidong was delighted and said, "This is enough for all needed preparation." She bought it and gave it to him, and from then on, he diligently studied day after day. At night, he studied by candlelight while Charon sat by his side, spinning silk. They shared the light together. Whenever he showed any sign of slackness, Charon would urge him on. They worked together in this manner for 2 years. Kidong, being a highly talented scholar, made steady progress. He was a beautiful writer and a master of the pen, and his compositions were peerless. It became evident that he was destined to win the highest place in the Kwago examination. Around this time, a proclamation was issued for a special examination to be held before His Majesty the King. Charon prepared the food and all necessities for Kidong to journey on foot to Seoul to try his hand. At last he found himself within the palace enclosure. His Majesty came into the examination arena and posted the subject. Kidong took his pen and composed his piece with ease and inspiration, his lines flowing like bubbling water. Once finished, the announcement was made, and the king ordered the sealed name of the writer to be opened. It was revealed that Kidong had secured the first place. At this time, Kidong's father was serving as prime minister and was in attendance upon the king. The king remarked to the prime minister, "It seems the winner is your son, but he writes that his father is chief justice, not prime minister. What can this mean?" He handed the composition to Kidong's father and asked him to verify it. The minister, upon seeing the writing, burst into tears and exclaimed, "This is my son's work. 3 years ago, he went with friends to a monastery to study, but disappeared one night. Despite my extensive search, there was no trace of him. I feared he had been lost to some wild animal and held a funeral service. Placing our house in mourning, he was my only child, gifted and dearly missed. Seeing his handwriting now brings back the memory of losing him, which feels as fresh as if it happened yesterday. He noted I was Chief Justice when he vanished. I have no idea where he has been for these 3 years or how he came to participate in this examination." The king, astonished, summoned Kidong before the assembly. Kidong, dressed in his scholar's robes, was brought into the king's presence. The king asked him why he left the monastery and where he had been for the past 3 years. Kidong bowed low and confessed, "I have acted wrongly, leaving my parents and breaking the laws of filial devotion, deserving of punishment." The king responded, "There is no concealment before the king. I will not condemn you. Speak the whole truth." Thus, Kidong recounted his story. All the officials listened intently. The king, moved by his tale, turned to the prime minister and said, "Your son has shown repentance and achieved great success. He has earned the highest place and now stands as a member of the court. We cannot judge him harshly for his love for Charon, forgive him for his past, and grant him a new beginning." His Majesty continued, "Charon, who has shared your trials in the mountains, is no ordinary woman. Her strategy for your recovery and success shows great wisdom. She is more than a dancing girl. Let her be your lawful wife. Raise her to equal rank with you, and may her descendants hold high offices in the realm." With these words, Kidong was honored, and his father received him back with joy. A grand celebration followed, where Charon was brought up in a palanquin and formally declared the wife of the minister's son. In time, Kidong rose to become one of Korea's foremost statesmen, and they lived happily together into old age. They had 2 sons, both distinguished graduates who held high office. The story of Chang Toyong Taoism has been a significant religion in Korea. Its main philosophy is captured in the phrase "Susi Myon Song," meaning to correct the mind and reform the nature. In contrast, Buddhism emphasizes Myeongsim Kyonsong, or to enlighten the heart and see the soul. Taoists aspire for eternal life, known as Changsang Pulsa, while Buddhists seek to transcend the physical existence. Within the Taoist cosmology, there are 3 realms of genii: the upper genii, who dwell with God; the midway genii, who interact with angels and spirits, and the lower genii, who inhabit sacred earthly places, such as hills. The story of Chang Toryong is set within this framework. During the reign of King Chengzhong, 1507 to 1526, a beggar named Chang Toryong lived in Seoul. He was around 40 years old, with an unattractive and perpetually dirty face. Despite his age, he wore his hair down his back like a young boy and carried a bag over his shoulder as he wandered the streets begging. His routine took him to various parts of the city during the day, and at night he would sleep near someone's gate. Chang was often seen in Chongno, Bell Street, mingling with the servants and lower-class workers of the wealthy. They enjoyed his company, sharing jokes and light-hearted conversations. Although he lived as a beggar, he claimed his name was Chang, and thus people called him Chang Toryong, where Toryong signifies an unmarried young man from a noble family. One notable figure during this time was Chan Uchi, a magician renowned for his pride and arrogance. Whenever Chan encountered Chang on the street, he would dismount and prostrate himself with great humility. He not only bowed but appeared deeply fearful of Chang, unable to meet his gaze. Chang's casual greeting, "Well, how goes it with you, eh?" was met with Chan's respectful response, "Very well, sir. Thank you. Very well," and Chan displayed visible fear in Chang's presence. Sometimes Chang would completely ignore Chan's respectful bows, walking past without acknowledgement. Witnesses of these interactions were puzzled and sought an explanation from Chan. Chan explained, "There are only 3 spirit men currently in Chosen. The greatest is Chang Toryong, the second is Chung Puk Chang, and the third is Yun Sepyong. People are unaware of this, but I know it. Therefore, I must show him reverence." Given Chan's own mysterious reputation, people largely dismissed his claims. In Seoul, there was a literary undergraduate whose house bordered the street. He often saw Chang begging and one day asked about his background. Chang revealed, "I come from a cultured family in Chula province, but my parents died of typhus fever, leaving me without relatives or home. I have no skills in any trade and am illiterate in Chinese letters, so I resort to begging." Moved by Chang's story, the undergraduate offered him food and hospitality. From that day, whenever there was a celebration at his home, he invited Chang to partake. One day, the undergraduate on his way to work saw a corpse being carried towards the water gate. Recognizing the body as Chang Toryong's, he felt a deep sorrow and returned home, lamenting, "There are many unfortunate souls in this world, but who has ever seen one as wretched as poor Chang?" For 15 years, he begged in Bell Street, and now he leaves the city as a lifeless body. 20 years and more afterward, the master had to make a journey through South Chula province. As he was passing Chi'i Mountain, he lost his way and got into a maze among the hills. The day began to wane, and he could neither return nor go forward. He saw a narrow footpath, such as woodmen take, and turned into it to see if it led to any habitation. As he went along, there were rocks and deep ravines. Little by little, as he advanced farther, the scene changed and seemed to become strangely transfigured. The farther he went, the more wonderful it became. After he had gone some miles, he discovered himself to be in another world entirely, no longer a world of earth and dust. He saw someone coming toward him dressed in ethereal green, mounted and carrying a shade with servants accompanying. The figure seemed to sweep toward him with swiftness and without effort. He thought to himself, "Here is some high lord or other coming to meet me, but," he added, "how among these deeps and solitudes could a gentleman come riding so?" He led his horse aside and tried to withdraw into one of the groves by the side of the way, but before he could think to turn, the man had reached him. The mysterious stranger lifted his 2 hands in salutation and inquired respectfully as to how he had been all this time. The master was speechless and so astonished that he could make no reply, but the stranger smilingly said, "My house is quite near here. Come with me and rest." He turned and, leading the way, seemed to glide and not to walk, while the master followed. At last, they reached the place indicated. He suddenly saw before him great palace halls filling whole squares of space. Beautiful buildings they were, richly ornamented. Before the door, attendants in official robes awaited them. They bowed to the master and led him into the hall. After passing a number of gorgeous palace-like rooms, he arrived at a special one and ascended to the upper story, where he met a very wonderful person. He was dressed in shining garments, and the servants that waited on him were exceedingly fair. There were, too, children about, so exquisitely beautiful that it seemed none other than a celestial palace. The master, alarmed at finding himself in such a place, hurried forward and made a low obeisance, not daring to lift his eyes. But the host smiled upon him, raised his hands, and asked, "Do you not know me? Look now." Lifting his eyes, he then saw that it was the same person who had come riding out to meet him, but he could not tell who he was. "I see you," said he, "but as to who you are, I cannot tell." The kingly host then said, "I am Chang Toryong. Do you not know me?" Then, as the master looked more closely at him, he could see the same features. The outlines of the face were there, but all the imperfections had gone, and only beauty remained. So wonderful was it that he was quite overcome. A great feast was prepared, and the honored guest was entertained. Such food, too, was placed before him as was never everything on earth. Angelic beings played on beautiful instruments and danced as no mortal eye ever looked upon. Their faces, too, were like pearls and precious stones. Chang To-ryong said to his guest, "There are 4 famous mountains in Korea in which the genii reside. This hill is one. In days gone by, for a fault of mine, I was exiled to earth, and in the time of my exile, you treated me with marked kindness, a favor that I have never forgotten. When you saw my body, your pity went out to me. This, too, I remember. I was not dead then, it was simply that my days of exile were ended, and I was returning home. I knew that you were passing this hill, and I desired to meet you, and to thank you for all your kindness. Your treatment of me in another world is sufficient to bring about our meeting in this one." And so they met and feasted in joy and great delight. When night descended, he was guided to a special pavilion where he would rest. The windows, adorned with jade and precious stones, emitted a soft, continuous glow, banishing the darkness. "I felt completely refreshed," he recounted. "My body rested, though sleep seemed unnecessary." At daybreak, another lavish feast awaited, followed by farewells. Chang advised, "This isn't your place to linger. You must depart. Our paths of genii and worldly men diverge. It may prove difficult for us to meet again. Take care and go in peace." With that, a servant was summoned to lead him out. Chang bowed respectfully and withdrew. Shortly after leaving, he found himself back in the mundane world, marked only by the planted stake where he exited. The servant vanished without a trace. The following year, the master attempted to return to the genii citadel, but found only treacherous mountains and impassable ravines. Its location remained elusive. As time passed, the master's spirit seemed to rejuvenate. At 90, he passed peacefully. During Chang's 15 years on Earth, he reflected, "I noticed only one peculiarity. His face never aged, and his clothing remained perpetually dirty yet unchanged in appearance. Our mortal eyes could not comprehend such strangeness." Imbang. A story of the Fox Orientals believe in the longevity and spiritual evolution of certain creatures like the tortoise, deer, crane, and fox. While these animals do not become angels or spiritual beings like humans, they supposedly undergo various transformations and can appear in different forms on Earth. Yi Kwai, son of a minister, achieved high office after passing his examinations. During his father's tenure as governor of Pyongan province, Kwai, then a young boy, often accompanied him. In the absence of his father, Kwai stayed at the yamen with his stepmother. Near the official quarters, there was a pavilion known as the Hill Pagoda, connected by a narrow gateway to the main hall. Kwai would sometimes study there with a yamen boy. One late night, after his companion had left, Kwai was surprised when a young woman suddenly entered the pavilion. She was neatly dressed and very attractive, but Kwai did not recognize her. She remained silent in a corner of the room, smiling mysteriously when he questioned her identity. As Kwai tried to engage with her, she knelt before him, and he, suspecting she might be a goblin or a fox spirit, decided to act. He swiftly carried her out into the yamen quarters, shouting for his stepmother and the servants to come. However, it was midnight, and everyone was asleep. No one responded to his calls. Realizing his mistake too late, Kwai felt a sharp bite on his neck from the woman on his back, confirming his suspicion that she was indeed a fox. Unable to bear the pain, he loosened his grip, and she escaped into the night, never to be seen again. It was a missed opportunity for Kwai, as no one came to his aid to capture the elusive fox spirit. Chung Puk-chang, the seer. The Yolryok Kiwisul, one of Korea's noted histories, says of Chung Puk-chang that he was pure in purpose and without selfish ambition. He was superior to all others in his marvelous gifts. For him to read a book once was to know it by heart. There was nothing that he could not understand: astronomy, geology, music, medicine, mathematics, fortune-telling, and Chinese characters, which he knew by intuition and not from study. He followed his father in the train of the envoy to Peking, and there talked to all the strange peoples whom he met without any preparation. They all wondered at him and called him the mystery. He knew, too, the meaning of the calls of birds and beasts, and while he lived in the mountains, he could see and tell what people were doing in the distant valley, indicating what was going on in each house, which, upon investigation, was found in each case to be true. He was a Taoist and received strange revelations. While in Peking, there met him envoys from the court of Luchu, who also were prophets. While in their own country, they had studied the horoscope, and on going into China, knew that they were to meet a holy man. As they went on their way, they asked concerning this mysterious being, and at last reached Peking. Inquiring, they went from one envoy's station to another, till they met Chung Puk-chang, when a great fear came upon them, and they fell prostrate to the earth. They took from their baggage a little book inscribed, "In such a year, on such a day, at such an hour, in such a place, you shall meet a holy man." "If this does not mean your excellency," said they, "whom can it mean?" They asked that he would teach them the sacred book of changes, and he responded by teaching it in their own language. At that time, the various envoys, hearing of this, contended with each other as to who should first see the marvelous stranger, and he spoke to each in his own tongue. They all, greatly amazed, said, "He is indeed a man of God." Someone asked him, saying, "There are those who understand the sounds of birds and beasts, but foreign languages have to be learned to be known. How can you speak them without study?" Puk-chang replied, "I do not know them from having learned them, but know them unconsciously." Puk-chang was acquainted with the three religions, but he considered Confucianism as the first. "Its writings as handed down," said he, "teach us filial piety and reverence. The learning of the sages deals with relationships among men and not with spiritual mysteries, but Taoism and Buddhism deal with the examination of the soul and the heart, and so with things above and not with things on the earth. This is the difference." At 32 years of age, he matriculated, but had no interest in further literary study. He became instead an official teacher of medicine, astrology, and mathematics. He was a fine whistler, we are told, and once when he had climbed to the highest peak of the Diamond Mountains and there whistled, the echoes resounded through the hills, and the priests were startled and wondered whose flute was playing. There is a term in Korea which reads Hian Pang Kwang, spiritual eye distant vision, the seeing of things in the distance. This pertains to both Taoists and Buddhists. It is said that when the student reaches a certain stage in his progress, the soft part of the head returns to the primal thinness that is seen in the child, to rise and fall when it breathes. From this part of the head go forth 5 rays of light that shoot out and up more and more as the student advances in the spiritual way. As far as they extend, so is the spiritual vision perfected, until at last a Korean sufficiently advanced could sit and say, "In London today, such and such a great affair is taking place." For example, So Wat Tam, who was a Taoist sage, once was seen to laugh to himself as he sat with closed eyes, and when asked why he laughed, said, "Just now in the monastery of Ha-in, 300 miles distant, there is a great feast going on. The priest stirring the huge kettle of bean gruel has tumbled in, but the others do not know this and are eating the soup." News came from the monastery later on that proved that what the sage had seen was actually true. The history of Confucius, too, deals with this when it tells of his going with his disciple Anja and looking off from the Tai mountains of Shantung toward the kingdom of On. Confucius asked Anja if he could see anything, and Anja replied, "I see white horses tied at the gates of On." Confucius said, No, your vision is imperfect. Desist from looking. They are not white horses, but are rolls of white silk hung out for bleaching." The story. The master, Puk-chang, was a noted Korean. From the time of his birth, he was a wonderful mystery. In reading a book, if he but glanced through it, he could recall it word for word. Without any special study, he became a master of astronomy, geology, medicine, fortune-telling, music, mathematics, and geomancy, and so truly a specialist was he that he knew them all. He was thoroughly versed also in the three great religions, Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. He talked constantly of what other people could not possibly comprehend. He understood the sounds of the birds, the voices of nature, and much else. He accompanied his father in his boyhood days when he went as envoy to Peking. At that time, strange barbarian peoples used also to come and pay their tribute. Puk Chang picked up acquaintance with them on the way. Hearing their language but once, he was readily able to communicate with them. His own countrymen who accompanied him were not the only ones astonished, nor the Chinamen themselves, but the barbarians as well. There are numerous interesting stories hinted at in the history of Puk Chang, but few suitable records were made of them, and so many are lost. There is one, however, that I recall that comes to me through trustworthy witnesses. Puk Chang, on a certain day, went to visit his paternal aunt. She asked him to be seated, and as they talked together, said to him, "I had some harvesting to do in Yongnam County, and sent a servant to see to it. His return is overdue, and yet he does not come. I am afraid he has fallen in with thieves, or chanced on a fire or some other misfortune." Puk Chang replied, "Shall I tell you how it goes with him, and how far he has come on the way?" She laughed, saying, "Do you mean to joke about it?" Puk Chang, from where he was sitting, looked off apparently to the far south, and at last said to his aunt, "He is just now crossing the hill called Bird Pass in Munkyong County, Gyeongsang Province. Hello, he is getting a beating just now from a passing Yangban gentleman, but I see it is his own fault, so you need not trouble about him." The aunt laughed and asked, "Why should he be beaten? What's the reason, pray?" Puk Chang replied, "It seems this official was eating his dinner at the top of the hill when your servant rode by him without dismounting. The gentleman was naturally very angry, and had his servants arrest your man, pull him from his horse, and beat him over the face with their rough straw shoes." The aunt could not believe it true, but treated the matter as a joke, and yet Puk Chang did not seem to be joking. Interested and curious, she made a note of the day on the wall after Puk Chang had taken his departure, and when the servant returned, she asked him what day he had come over Bird Pass, and it proved to be the day recorded. She added also, "Did you get into trouble with a Yangban there when you came by?" The servant gave a startled look and asked, "How do you know?" He then told all that had happened to him, and it was just as Puk Chang had given it, even to the smallest detail. Imbang.
Yun Sepyong the Wizard. Yun Sepyong was a man of soul who lived to the age of over 90. When he was young, he loved archery and went as military attaché to the capital of the Mings, Nanking. There he met a prophet who taught him the Wangjong Kyong, or sacred book of the Taoists, and thus he learned their laws and practiced their teachings. His life was written by Yi So-kwang. Chan Yu-chi, the magician of Songdo. Chan Yu-chi was a magician of Songdo who lived about 1550 and was associated in his life with Shin Kwang-hu. At the latter's residence one day when a friend called, Kwang-hu asked Chan to show them one of his special feats. A little later, they brought in a table of rice for each of the party, and Chan took a mouthful of his, and then blew it out toward the courtyard, when the rice changed into beautiful butterflies that flew gaily away. Chang Osa used to tell a story of his father, who said that one day Chan came to call upon him at his house and asked for a book entitled The 2Si, which he gave to him. "I had no idea," said the father, "that he was dead and that it was his ghost. I gave him the book, though I did not learn till afterwards that he had been dead for a long time." The History of Famous Men says, "He was a man who understood heretical magic and other dangerous teachings by which he deceived the people. He was arrested for this and locked up in prison in Sinchan, Wanghai Province, and there he died. His burial was ordered by the prison authorities, and later, when his relatives came to exhume his remains, they found that the coffin was empty. This and the story of Imbang do not agree as to his death, and I am not able to judge between them. JSG. The transformation of men into beasts, bugs, and creeping things comes from Buddhism. One seldom finds it in Taoism. The story. Yun Sepyong was a military man who rose to the rank of minister in the days of King Chungjong. It seems that Yun learned the doctrine of magic from a passing stranger, whom he met on his way to Peking in company with the envoy. When at home, he lived in a separate house, quite apart from the other members of his family. He was a man so greatly feared that even his wife and children dared not approach him. What he did in secret no one seemed to know. In winter he was seen to put iron cleats under each arm and to change them frequently, and when they were put off they seemed to be red hot. At the same time there was a magician in Korea called Chon Yu-chi, who used to go about Seoul plying his craft. So skillful was he that he could even simulate the form of the master of a house and go freely into the women's quarters. On this account he was greatly feared and detested. Yun heard of him on more than one occasion and determined to rid the earth of him. Chon heard also of Yun and gave him a wide berth, never appearing in his presence. He used frequently to say, "I am a magician only, Yun is a god." On a certain day Chon informed his wife that Yun would come that afternoon and try to kill him, and so, said he, "I shall change my shape in order to escape his clutches. If anyone comes asking for me, just say that I am not at home." He then metamorphosed himself into a beetle and crawled under a crock that stood overturned in the courtyard. When evening began to fall, a young woman came to Chon's house, a very beautiful woman too, and asked, "Is the Master Chon at home?" The wife replied, "He has just gone out." The woman laughingly said, "Master Chon and I have been special friends for a long time, and I have an appointment with him today. Please say to him that I have come." Chon's wife, seeing a pretty woman come thus, and ask in such a familiar way for her husband, flew into a rage and said, "The rascal has evidently a second wife that he has never told me of. What he said just now is all false." So she went out in a fury and with a club smashed the crock. When the crock was broken, there was the beetle underneath it. Then the woman who had called suddenly changed into a bee and flew at and stung the beetle. Chon, metamorphosed into his accustomed form, fell over and died, and the bee flew away. Yun lived at his own house as usual, when suddenly he broke down one day in a fit of tears. The members of his family in alarm asked the reason. He replied, "My sister living in Chula province has just at this moment died." He then called his servants and had them prepare funeral supplies, saying, "They are poor where she lives, and so I must help them." He wrote a letter, and after sealing it, said to one of his attendants, "If you go just outside the gate, you will meet a man wearing a horsehair cap and a soldier's uniform. Call him in. He is standing there ready to be summoned." He was called in, and sure enough he was a Kan Yun No, servant of the gods. He came in and at once prostrated himself before Yun. Yun said, "My sister has just now died in such a place in Chula province. Take this letter and go at once. I shall expect you back tonight with the answer. The matter is of such great importance that if you do not bring it as I order, and within the time appointed, I shall have you punished." He replied, "I shall be in time, be not anxious." Yun then gave him the letter and the bundle, and he went outside the main gateway and disappeared. Before dark he returned with the answer. The letter read, "She died at such an hour today, and we were in straits as to what to do, when your letter came with the supplies, just as though we had seen each other. Wonderful it is." The man who brought the answer immediately went out and disappeared. The House of Mourning is situated over 10 days' journey from Seoul, but he returned ere sunset in the space of 2 or 3 hours. Imbang.
The wildcat woman Kim Soo-ik, a Seoul native who enrolled in 1624 and graduated in 1630, accompanied the king in 1636 during his escape to Namhan from the invading Manchu army. He opposed any compromise with China or treaties, but his advice went unheeded, leading him to withdraw from public life. Tong Chung-so, a notable figure from China, once secluded himself for 3 years to focus on study. During this time, a young man visited him and while waiting, remarked to himself, "It will rain today." Tong immediately responded, "If you're not a sly one, you must be quite direct. Leave at once." The man promptly fled. Tong's insight came from the saying, "Birds and trees predict wind, ground beasts know of rain." The young man inadvertently revealed his nature, likened to a wild cat. The story. Former Quelpart magistrate Kim Soo-ik resided near Seoul's South Gate. In his youth, he devoted late-night hours to studying Chinese. Once, feeling hungry, he asked his wife to bring him food. She replied, "All we have are 7 or 8 chestnuts. Should I roast them for you?" Kim agreed, saying, "Sure, bring them over." The servants were asleep, and there was no one available to answer a call, so the wife went to the kitchen, made a fire, and cooked the meal herself. Kim waited patiently for her to return. After a while, she brought the food in a handbasket, freshly cooked and served for him. Kim enjoyed the meal greatly. Meanwhile, she sat before his desk and waited. Suddenly, the door opened, and another person entered. Kim looked up and saw an exact duplicate of his wife carrying a basket of roasted chestnuts. Under the light, both women looked identical. They stared at each other in surprise, asking, "What's happening? Who are you?" Kim received the roasted nuts again, set them down, and then firmly grasped each woman, the first with his right hand and the second with his left, holding them tightly until daybreak. As the cocks crowed and dawn approached, the woman he held by the right hand protested, "Why are you holding me so tightly? It hurts. Let me go." She struggled and pulled, but Kim held on tighter. Eventually, after a fierce struggle, she fell to the floor and transformed suddenly into a wild cat. Startled and fearful, Kim let her go, and she escaped through the door. It was a shame he hadn't secured the beast once and for all. Note by the writer, stories of foxes transforming into women and deceiving people are found in Chinese novels like Kuang Kui, but the transformation into a wild cat is even more remarkable and unfamiliar to me. What rules govern such creatures like foxes and wild cats in their transformations? I'm at a loss to explain it. Some suggest that foxes possess magic charms enabling such transformations, but what about wild cats? Imbang.
The ill-fated priest. A scribe from Chungcheong province named Kim Kyongjin shared this tale with me. He said, "Back in 1640, while I was traveling near Bighorn Bridge in Tai'an County, I encountered a scholar and his 4 or 5 servants. They were all lying unconscious by the riverside after some mishap. When I inquired about their condition, they eventually explained, 'We were having our lunch by the road when a Buddhist priest passed by. He was haughty and didn't acknowledge us. One servant, offended by the disrespect, called out to him. The priest responded by striking him with his staff, and when the others tried to intervene, he beat them too, leaving them all incapacitated. He then turned to the scholar and chastised him, saying, 'Since you didn't correct your servants for their rudeness to me, I'll have to punish you as well.' He struck the scholar repeatedly, causing him to collapse. I saw the priest a short distance ahead. At that moment, a military officer who looked about 40 years old approached. He was thin and appeared weak. He rode a gaunt pony and was followed by a boy carrying his hat cover and archery gear. Upon reaching the stream and seeing the distressed group, he asked what had happened. The officer, clearly upset, explained, 'That insolent priest, surprisingly strong, has assaulted my attendants and me.' 'Indeed,' the stranger declared, 'I've known about him for quite some time and have resolved to remove him from this world, yet I've never had the chance until now. Having finally encountered him, I'm set on resolving this matter.' With that, he got off his horse, adjusted his saddle, armed himself with his bow and a specially tipped arrow, and chased after the clergyman at full speed. He quickly caught up to him. As the clergyman glanced back, the archer released his arrow, striking him deeply in the torso. He then got down, unsheathed his sword, and incapacitated the clergyman's hands, securing him to the tail of his horse, and returned victoriously to where the scholar was waiting, proclaiming, 'He's all yours to deal with. I'm off.' The scholar expressed his gratitude to the archer, inquired about his home and name. The archer disclosed, 'I reside in Kochong County,' but withheld his name. Observing the clergyman, the scholar noted his formidable size, but now, rendered speechless by his injuries, they left him behind and continued on their journey with a sense of triumph. Imbang.
The vision of the holy man Yi Chi-ham, Master Tejong, was known for his extraordinary deeds and insights. Shortly after his wedding, Yi Chi-ham tore his ceremonial coat into bandages for a sick child he encountered, showing his selfless compassion. He once foresaw a calamity befalling his father-in-law's home and preemptively moved his wife away. The following year, the family was indeed wiped out due to political reasons. Yi Chi-ham possessed not only prophetic abilities but also magical powers, notably controlling the seas as he sailed peacefully across them for extended voyages. He practiced extreme asceticism, enduring long periods without food or water and ignoring physical pain, such as walking with blistered feet without flinching. In his youth, he studied under the famous Taoist So Wadam, adopting a humble lifestyle despite his acquaintance with high-ranking officials. He engaged in mystical practices, such as using gourd cups to control winds during his travels to and from Quelpart. Yi Chi-ham engaged in commerce, amassed wealth, and used it to help the poor, including providing land that yielded rice for distribution. Known as Mud Pavilion, he lived simply in a dugout in Seoul, using a metal cap to cook his food, wearing wooden shoes, and riding a pack saddle. During his tenure as magistrate in Asan County, he built homes for the needy and encouraged them to work and thrive, even teaching them crafts like weaving straw shoes. Despite criticism from Yulgok for being too idealistic, Yi Chi-ham remained steadfast, asserting his worth and contributions to society. Source: Korea's Record of Famous Men. Teacher Tojong was once a merchant who traveled as far as the East Sea in his business ventures. One night, he stayed in a fishing village by the shore. During his stay, another traveler, known as a holy man, arrived. The three of them met and conversed until late into the night. The host, the holy man, and Tojong. The night was exceptionally clear and calm. At one point, the holy man gazed out over the water and suddenly became greatly alarmed, exclaiming, "A terrible event is imminent." His companions, startled by his demeanor, asked him to explain. He warned them, "In about 2 hours, a tidal wave will sweep over this village, destroying everything in its path. If you don't hurry to safety, we will be caught like fish in a net." Tojong, somewhat knowledgeable in astrology, tried to comprehend the situation but couldn't find an explanation. The homeowner refused to believe the warning and declined to prepare for escape. Nevertheless, the holy man persisted, suggesting, "Even if you doubt my words, let us climb a little way up the mountain behind us. If I am wrong, we can return, and no harm will be done. If you still distrust me, leave your belongings and let the people come away." Tojong was intrigued, though perplexed. Eventually, the homeowner agreed to the plan and gathered his family and a few essentials to follow the holy man up the hill. They ascended to the summit for safety, as the holy man advised. Tojong, however, chose to remain halfway up the mountain and asked the holy man if this location would be safe. The holy man replied, "Others would not escape if they stayed where you are, but you will only be frightened and survive." As dawn approached, true to the holy man's warning, the sea surged suddenly, flooding the village and reaching the mountainside where Tojong stood. The entire coastal town was submerged. When daylight returned, the waters receded. Tojong bowed to the holy man and asked to become his disciple. The holy man, modestly disclaiming any special knowledge, attributed his foresight to chance. He was not one to boast of his abilities. Tojong inquired about where the holy man lived, but when he sought him out the next day, the house was empty, and the holy man was nowhere to be found. Bang. The visit of the man of God. In the 33rd year of Malyok of the Ming Dynasty, AD 1605, during the reign of King Sanjo in the 7th month, an unprecedented rainstorm occurred, the likes of which had never been seen since the dynasty's founding. Prior to this deluge, a woodcutter from Kangwon province was busy on a hillside chopping wood when an angel clad in golden armor descended from heaven on a white horse, wielding a spear. His presence was dazzling, and the woodcutter recognized him immediately as a man of God. Accompanying him was a Buddhist priest carrying a staff, whose appearance was equally remarkable. The man of God halted his horse and appeared to converse with the priest. Startled by the sight, the woodcutter hid among the trees. Seemingly enraged for some undisclosed reason, the man of God raised his spear and, gesturing towards the four winds, declared, "I shall flood the earth from here to there and destroy all its inhabitants." The priest pleaded fervently, beseeching him to relent, saying, "Such wrath will mean annihilation for mortals. Let your anger fall upon me instead." Moved by the priest's prayers, the man of God reconsidered, saying, "Then I shall confine it to specific places. Will that suffice?" Yet the priest continued to implore, until the man of God firmly replied, "For your sake, I have already reduced the punishment by more than half. I can do no more." Despite further prayers, the man of God remained resolute, prompting the priest to finally submit, saying, "Thy will be done." Having concluded their discussion, both departed, ascending through the upper air back to heaven. Although they had conversed at length, the woodcutter, being at a distance, did not hear all that was said clearly. Nonetheless, he hurried home with his family and escaped just in time, for soon after, torrential rain began. Mount Otai collapsed, the ground sank, creating a vast lake, and all its inhabitants perished, except for the woodcutter who had fled. In 1654, there lived a scholar in Imsil who claimed mastery over spirits, boasting that 2 demon guards obeyed his every command. One day, while playing chess with a friend, they agreed that the loser would buy drinks. The friend lost, but refused to honor the bet. The scholar grew increasingly frustrated and warned, "If you don't pay up, I'll make things difficult for you." The friend remained obstinate, so the scholar, in a fit of anger, turned away and uttered a command into the air. Immediately, the friend tried to flee through the courtyard, but an invisible force seized him, delivering a series of powerful blows that left deep, bruised marks on his body. Overwhelmed by the pain, he finally relented. At this, the scholar laughed and released him. On another occasion, he was sitting with a friend when they heard drums and gongs from a nearby village where a witch's exorcism was underway. Suddenly, he rushed into a bamboo grove behind the official's residence, looking furious with glaring eyes. He shouted and bared his arm as if driving away unseen beings. After a while, he stopped. His friend, intrigued by this unusual behavior, asked what it was about. He replied, "A group of spirits from the exorcism have gathered in the bamboo grove. If I don't disperse them, trouble will follow in the town. That's why I shouted." Once, while traveling with another friend, he abruptly shouted into the air, "Let her go, I say. Release her, or I'll punish you severely." His friend, alarmed by his intense demeanor, asked what was happening. He remained silent for a while, and they continued their journey. That night, they arrived at a village where they wanted to stay, but the homeowner refused, claiming illness in the household. Despite the rejection, they persisted until a servant was sent to drive them away. Meanwhile, women inside the house watched through the cracks in the window, whispering anxiously. The scholar overheard their conversation. Shortly after, the homeowner returned humbly, begging them to come back and offering hospitality. He explained, "My daughter fell ill today and seemingly died. After some time, she revived and said a spirit took her soul down the main road. They were stopped by a man who drove away the spirit fiercely, allowing her to return to life. She saw you through the window crack, sir, and recognized you as that man. I don't know how to thank you. Are you a supernatural being or a Buddhist capable of such miracles? Please accept this small offering." The scholar laughed and dismissed it as nonsense, saying he couldn't perform such feats. He lived for several more years before passing away. The East believes in the existence of invisible elements that, when controlled, can manifest in various life forms. A man from Kangwa had mastered the art of summoning elements to create butterflies, a skill derived from Taoist magic known as Son Sul. The story once, there was a soldier from Kangwa who was respected in his village despite being from a humble background and seemingly lacking any special talents. One midwinter day, his wife, overcome with jealousy, sat sewing in their home. Since he had to stay home that day, he tried to cheer her up by saying, "Would you like to see me create some butterflies?" His wife, even more upset, scolded him for his audacity and ignored him. Undeterred, the soldier took her work basket, picked out pieces of silk in different colors, held them in his hand, and recited a prayer. Then he threw the silk into the air. Instantly, beautiful butterflies filled the room, dazzling in the colors of the silk itself. The wife, amazed by this spectacle, forgot her anger. Later, the soldier opened his hand and all the butterflies flew back into it. He closed his hand again, and when he opened it once more, they were just pieces of silk. Only his wife witnessed this transformation. Others were unaware of this mysterious magic. In 1637, when Kangwa fell to the Manchus, the people fled in fear for their lives, but the soldier remained calm at home, having meals with his family as usual. He laughed at the neighbors rushing past, saying, "The invaders won't touch this town. Why are you running?" Indeed, while the entire island suffered devastation, the soldier's village was spared. Imbang. In 1396, Ha-yon graduated and became the magistrate of Anak County. He constructed numerous pavilions around his residence where people could relax. While touring his district and observing busy farmers, he composed many songs and verses to uplift them in their work. Later, he served as a royal censor, earning praise from King Taijong, who commended him as a diligent servant. Ha-yon eventually became chief justice, purging corrupt officials from public offices and ensuring the court's integrity. In his leisure time, he dressed in ceremonial attire, burned incense, sat attentively, and spent entire days composing prayer verses. During his youth, he impressed the court of the crown prince with his writing, which was described as beautiful writing, beautiful thought, truly a treasure. Ha-yon was renowned for his scholarly pursuits, humility, and friendly demeanor. He studied under the patriot Chung Mongju as a young boy, always maintaining a virtuous and principled approach. His aspiration was to emulate the ancients, dedicating himself to truth and promoting the study of sacred texts. Rising early at the crack of dawn, he would wash, dress, and diligently engage with his books, surrounded by pictures on his right and books on his left, finding contentment in his scholarly pursuits. Eventually, he ascended to the position of prime minister. The old ancestral home of Prince Hayun was situated in Kumchan County. During times of peace and prosperity, he served as a renowned minister of state and often sought relaxation at his summer retreat in the same county. This mansion, spacious and well-maintained, remained in his family for many years following his passing. Local folklore recounts a peculiar tale of Hayun's prosperity. It's said that in an upper room of his mansion, there was a large crock used for storing flour. One day, a servant, intending to access the flour, lifted the lid and was startled when a massive snake emerged from within. Frightened, the servant hurried to inform Hayun. He promptly dispatched his men to retrieve the jar. Upon breaking it open, they confronted a monstrous serpent unlike any seen before. Several servants joined forces using clubs to kill the creature. They then set fire to it, but the resulting fumes proved deadly. Everyone inside the house succumbed, leaving no survivors to carry on the family legacy. Those who later entered the house also met untimely ends, leading to the property being considered cursed and abandoned. Eventually, a mysterious fire destroyed the remaining structures, leaving only an empty plot of land. To this day, the location is known as haunted, and no one dares to rebuild upon it. By Imbang. During the Manchu War of 1636, as the people of Seoul fled in panic, one group unexpectedly encountered a formidable enemy force, fully armed and mounted, blocking every route of escape in the hills and valleys. They were paralyzed with fear and desperation. Amid this dire situation, they came across a stranger sitting calmly on the main road under a pine tree, seemingly unaffected. He had dismounted from his horse, which was held by a servant nearby, and a screen of cotton cloth shielded him from the passing army's dust. Approaching him, they pleaded, "We're all doomed. What should we do?" The mysterious stranger replied, "Why fear death? Why be afraid? Sit with me and watch the enemy pass." Seeing his remarkable composure and having no alternative, they followed his advice and sat down with him. The enemy cavalry rode by in large numbers, mercilessly killing everyone in their path. Yet when they reached the spot where the stranger sat, they passed by without seeming to notice anything amiss. This continued until evening, by which time the entire enemy force had moved on. Throughout the day, the stranger and his companions remained unharmed, despite being in the heart of the enemy's camp. Realizing he possessed extraordinary powers, they all bowed before him, eager to know his name and where he came from. However, he remained silent, mounted his magnificent horse, and swiftly rode away, evading all attempts to catch him. The next day, they encountered a man who had been captured but managed to escape. They asked if he had witnessed anything unusual the previous day. He recounted, "As I followed the enemy army near that specific point," pointing to where the magician had sat with the people, "we passed by great walls and steep cliffs that blocked our path, which we had not seen before." Thus, the few yards of cotton cloth had seemingly transformed before the eyes of those who witnessed the events. Source: Imbang. The old man who became a fish. Some years ago, a prominent official took office as the magistrate of Kosong County. One day, a visitor came to pay respects, and at noon, the magistrate served him a meal that included skate soup. The guest, upon seeing the soup, contorted his face and declined, saying, "Today I am fasting from meat and must respectfully decline." His face grew pale, tears streamed down his cheeks. Finding the behavior odd, the magistrate pressed for an explanation, and after much insistence, the guest revealed a remarkable and sorrowful tale. "My lord," he began, "in my life I have witnessed extraordinary and tragic events which I have kept secret until now. But since you inquire, I feel compelled to share. My father, nearly a century old, fell gravely ill with a fever that burned like fire. We feared for his life, gathered around him in tears, expecting his end. But he survived, and a few days later he made an unusual request. 'I am consumed by the heat of this sickness,' he said. 'Take me to the riverbank by our house where I can see the water flowing and find relief.' We hesitated, pleaded with him not to go, but he insisted vehemently, threatening dire consequences if we disobeyed. Reluctantly, we carried him to the riverbank. He gazed upon the water with joy, claiming its clear flow eased his suffering. Then he surprised us further, demanding solitude, urging us to retreat into the woods and wait for his summons. Despite our protests, he grew angry, leaving us no choice but to comply. We withdrew a short distance and watched from afar. Suddenly, he vanished from where he sat. Rushing back, we found his clothes abandoned, and in the water that had turned murky, we saw his transformation. His body had partly become that of a skate. Horrified, we dared not approach. Soon after, he changed into a large flatfish, swimming and frolicking in the water with apparent joy. He glanced back at us briefly before disappearing into the depths of the sea, never to be seen again. At the spot where he transformed, we found his fingernails and a tooth, which we buried. Since then, our family has abstained from skatefish. Whenever we encounter others consuming or cooking it, we are filled with revulsion and dread. Imbang. There once lived a geomancer named Yi Iwi Sin, well-versed in the mystical art that blended Taoism and ancient Chinese philosophy. His expertise lay in finding auspicious sites influenced by the principles of yin and yang and the 5 elements: metal, water, fire, and earth. In Korea, immense sums were spent on geomancers like Yi, believed to secure fortunate homes for the living and favorable resting places for the deceased, reflecting a deep connection between earthly fortune and human destiny. One day, Yi embarked on a journey to locate a special mountain vein, starting from Dragon Ridge in North Hamgyong Province and following it until he reached Pine Mountain in Yangju County. There, he found the vein culminating in a perfect spot for burial, a beautifully rounded end. After a day spent wandering the hills, Yi grew hungry and spotted a small house nestled beneath a hill. He approached and politely asked for food. The owner, a mourner recently bereaved, respectfully offered him a dish of white gruel. As they ate, Yi inquired about the mourner's circumstances, learning that they were about to enter full mourning, but had not yet arranged the funeral. Feeling empathy, Yi asked if their delay was due to financial constraints or difficulty finding a suitable site. He offered his expertise, saying, "I am skilled in reading the hills. I can show you a site if you'd like to see it." Gratefully, the mourner accepted Yi's offer. Yi then revealed the auspicious end of the mountain vein he had discovered and advised on the precise placement of the grave according to compass points. By possessing this site, he assured, you will gain great prosperity. However, in 10 years' time, you will need to relocate. When that time comes, please remember me. You can find me under the name Yi So Pong, residing in West School Ward, Seoul. Filled with gratitude, the mourner thanked Yi and promised to seek him out when the time came for a new site. Thus, Yi Uisin's reputation as a geomancer continued to grow, offering both practical guidance and spiritual comfort to those in need. The mourner followed the geomancer's advice diligently, and true to the prediction, his fortunes flourished. He constructed a grand tiled residence and adorned the grave with substantial stones, reflecting the prosperity befitting a noble country gentleman. After a decade had passed, a visitor arrived one day and, greeting him respectfully, inquired, "Is that grave over yonder, beyond the stream, yours?" The master replied affirmatively. The guest then remarked, "That site is renowned, but it has been 10 years since you acquired it, and the luck has waned. Why not consider a change? Delay could lead to regret and potential disaster." Upon hearing this warning, the owner recalled the words of Yi the geomancer from years past. Recollecting this, he invited the stranger to stay as his guest while he traveled to Seoul the next day to seek out Yi in West School Ward. Finding Yi, he explained the situation. Yi calmly responded, "I was already aware of this." Together, they returned to the owner's home with the guest. They ascended the hill where Yi questioned the guest. "What prompted you to advise the master to relocate the site?" The guest answered, "This hill forms a kneeling pheasant configuration. If the pheasant kneels too long, it cannot endure, and within a limited time, it must fly. 10 years is the critical period, hence my suggestion." Yi chuckled and remarked, "Your perspective is only a partial view. You have considered only one aspect. There are other factors at play." He pointed to the peak behind them, identifying it as Dog Hill, then to the hill above, Falcon Hill, and finally to the stream ahead, known as Cat River. This entire configuration includes the dog behind, the falcon above, and the cat in front. How then can the pheasant fly? It dare not. Impressed, the guest acknowledged Yi's insight, saying, "Teacher, your vision is truly profound, surpassing that of ordinary men." From that day onward, the Yi family of Pine Hill rose to prominence, becoming renowned throughout the region. Anon. Kim Yu, the son of a provincial magistrate, distinguished himself academically and graduated with honors in 1596. His career took a significant turn in 1623 when he joined loyal courtiers in supporting the removal of Prince Kwang Hai and the ascension of Inzhou to the throne. Kim Yu was later elevated to the rank of prince and eventually became prime minister. In 1624, he played a pivotal role in quelling Yi Kual's rebellion and bringing its adherents to justice. He passed away in 1648 at the age of 77. During King Sanzhou's final year, he gathered his grandchildren and asked them to write Chinese characters and draw pictures. Among them, young Inzhou drew a picture of a horse. King Sanzhou initially gave this drawing to Yi Hangbak, but when Yi later went into exile, he entrusted the picture to Kim Yu. Kim Yu hung it in his home, where it remained. One day, Prince Inzhou sought shelter from the rain at a gate quarters outside the palace. Initially declining an invitation inside, he eventually relented and entered, where he noticed the horse picture on the wall. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was the very drawing he had made as a boy. Surprised, he inquired about it just as Kim Yu entered the room. Inzhou explained its significance, revealing his connection to the drawing. As they conversed, a sumptuous meal was unexpectedly brought in from the inner quarters, prompting Kim Yu to question his wife about the gesture. She explained that she had dreamt of the king visiting their house and had prepared the feast upon seeing Inzhou at their door. Learning the identity of his guest, Kim Yu became a staunch supporter of Inzhou, eventually aiding his ascent to the throne. After becoming king, Inzhou privately asked Kim Yu about the origin of the picture. Kim Yu disclosed that he received it from Prince Yi Hangbak. Curious about its history, Kim Yu approached Yi's son, who explained that King Sanzhou had gifted the drawing to his father during a gathering of grandchildren, signifying support for Inzhou's future succession. Thus, the picture of the horse with its symbolic willow tree tied to it carried profound meaning, cementing alliances and shaping the course of royal succession in Korea's history. The story. A certain minister of state called Kim Yu lived in the county of Songpyeong. He had a relative, an elderly man close to 100 years old, who resided in a far-off part of the country. One day, the son of this patriarch came to Minister Kim's office seeking an audience. Kim Yu, intrigued, ordered his admission and inquired about the purpose of his visit. The son, looking troubled, replied, "I have something very important to discuss, a private matter to lay before your excellency. However, as you have many guests with you now, I will return in the evening to share it." True to his word, the son returned that evening once the guests had departed. Minister Kim dismissed his personal retainers and invited the man to speak. The son then recounted a peculiar and disturbing tale. "My father, though very old, was a vigorous and hearty man, as you may know. One day he called all of us, his children, to him and said, 'I wish to take a siesta. Close the door and all of you leave the room. Do not let anyone enter until I call for you.' We, of course, agreed and did as he asked. As the hours passed and night fell with no word from him, we grew anxious. At last, we peered through a crack in the door and were horrified to see that our father had transformed into a huge pig. Shocked and terrified, we cautiously opened the door. The animal grunted, growled, and attempted to rush past us. We quickly closed the door and held a hurried consultation. Some suggested that we keep the pig indoors and care for it. Others proposed that we should hold a funeral and bury it. Being simple country folk, unfamiliar with such bizarre events, I have come to seek your counsel, Your Excellency. Please consider this strange phenomenon and advise us on what we should do." Prince Kim, startled by this unusual story, pondered deeply for a long time before responding, "This is indeed an unheard of mystery, and I cannot say for certain what should be done. However, it seems to me that since this transformation has occurred, it would be unwise to bury it alive. Thus, the idea of a funeral should be abandoned. Furthermore, since it is no longer a human being, keeping it in the house is not appropriate either. Considering that it wishes to escape, and since its proper habitat would be a cave in the woods or hills, I suggest you take it into the deep mountains and release it into a remote area where no man has set foot." The son accepted this thoughtful advice and followed the minister's guidance. He took the transformed pig deep into the mountains and set it free. Afterwards, he donned sackcloth, mourned, and held a funeral for his father's clothes. The day of his father's metamorphosis was observed annually as a day of sacrificial ceremony. The old woman who became a goblin. There was a Confucian scholar once who lived in the southern part of Seoul. It is said that he went out for a walk one day while his wife remained alone at home. When he was absent, there came by begging an old woman who looked like a Buddhist priestess, for while very old, her face was not wrinkled. The scholar's wife asked her if she knew how to sew. She said she did, and so the wife made this proposition: "If you will stay and work for me, I'll give you your breakfast and your supper, and you'll not have to beg anywhere. Will you agree?" She replied, "Oh, thank you so much, I'll be delighted." The scholar's wife, well satisfied with her bargain, took her in and set her to picking cotton and making and spinning thread. In one day she did more than 8 ordinary women, and yet had, seemingly, plenty of time to spare. The wife, delighted above measure, treated her to a great feast. After 5 or 6 days, however, the feeling of delight and the desire to treat her liberally and well wore off somewhat, so that the old woman grew angry and said, "I am tired of living alone, and so I want your husband for my partner." This being refused, she went off in a rage, but came back in a little while, accompanied by a decrepit old man who looked like a Buddhist beggar. These two came boldly into the room and took possession, cleared out the things that were in the ancient tablet box on the wall shelf, and both disappeared into it, so that they were not seen at all, but only their voices heard. According to the whim that took them, they now ordered eatables and other things. When the scholar's wife failed in the least particular to please them, they sent plague and sickness after her, so that her children fell sick and died. Relatives, on hearing of this, came to see, but they also caught the plague, fell ill, and died. Little by little, no one dared come near the place, and it became known at last that the wife was held as a prisoner by these 2 goblin creatures. For a time, smoke was seen by the townfolk coming out of the chimney daily, and they knew that the wife still lived, but after 5 or 6 days the smoke ceased, and they knew then that the woman's end had come. No one dared even to make inquiry. The Grateful Ghost. During the Koryo dynasty, 980 to 1392, a story is often told about a scholar who traveled from a distant region to take part in an important examination. One day, as evening approached, he found himself deep in the mountains. Suddenly, he heard a sneezing sound coming from the bushes and creepers by the roadside, but he saw no one around. Curious, he dismounted from his horse and ventured into the undergrowth to investigate. Hearing the sound again, he traced it to a particular spot near the roots of a creeper. He instructed his servant to dig around the area, uncovering a human skull. The skull was filled with earth, and the roots of the creeper had penetrated through its nostrils, causing the sneezing sound. Moved by pity for the disturbed spirit, the scholar washed the skull with clean water, wrapped it in paper, and respectfully reburied it. He also prepared a small offering of food and said a prayer over the grave. That night, the scholar dreamed of an elderly man with white hair, dressed as a fellow scholar, who bowed and expressed his gratitude. The old man explained, "Due to sins from a past life, I died prematurely and before my time. My descendants were also wiped out, and my body decayed into the earth, leaving only my skull, which you found. The roots of the creeper caused me great discomfort, forcing me to sneeze. Your kindness, blessed by heaven, led you to re-enter me in a clean place and offer food. Your benevolence is immense, like the mountains and the blessings of life itself. Though my soul is still imperfect, I wish to repay your kindness. You are on your way to the official examination, and I want to help you. I will reveal the format and subject of the exam. It will be written in couplets of 5-character lines with the rhyme Pong, and the topic will be peaks and spires of the summer clouds. I've even composed a poem for you, which, if you use, will surely win you the highest honor. It goes like this. The white sun rode high up in the heavens, and the floating clouds formed a lofty peak. The priest who saw them asked if there was a temple there, and the crane lamented the fact that no pines were visible. But the lightnings from the cloud were the flashings of the woodman's axe, and the muffled thunders were the bell calls of the holy temple. Will any say that the hills do not move? On the sunset breezes they sailed away. After reciting the poem, the old man bowed again and disappeared from the dream. When the scholar awoke, he marveled at the vividness of the dream and continued his journey to Seoul. Upon arrival at the examination hall, he discovered that the exam topic was exactly as the ghost had foretold. Trusting the dream, he used the provided poem and, as promised, was awarded the highest honor in the examination. Source: Imbang. The Plucky Maiden, Han Myung-hoi. We are told in the Yeolryok Koisul that when Han was a boy, he had for protector and friend a tiger, who used to accompany him as a dog does his master. One evening, when he started off into the hills, he heard the distant tramp of the great beast, who had got scent of his going and had come rushing after him. When Han saw him, he turned and said, "Good old chap, you come all this distance to be my friend. I love you for it." Yet the tiger prostrated himself and nodded with his head several times. He used to accompany Han all through the nights, but when the day dawned, he would leave him. Han later fell into bad company, grew fond of drink, and was one of the boisterous companions of King Sejong. The story. Han Myung-hoi was a renowned minister during the reign of King Sejong, AD 1455 to 1468. The king appreciated and enjoyed Han's company greatly, and there was no one at court who could surpass him in influence and royal favor. Confident in his position, Han did as he pleased, wielding absolute power. At that time, like grass before the wind, the world bowed at his coming. No one dared utter a word of remonstrance. When Han went as governor to Pyongan province, he engaged in all manner of lawless activities. Anyone daring to cross his wishes in the slightest was met with torture and death. The entire province feared him as they would a tiger. One day, Governor Han heard that the deputy prefect of Sanchan had a very beautiful daughter. Summoning the deputy, Han declared, "I hear that you have a very beautiful daughter whom I would like to make my concubine. When I am on my official rounds shortly, I shall expect to stop at your town and take her, so be ready for me." The deputy, alarmed, replied, "How can your excellency say that your servant's contemptible daughter is beautiful? Someone has reported her wrongly, but since you so command, how can I do anything but accede gladly?" Bowing, he bid farewell and returned home. Noticing the deputy's anxious expression, his family inquired about the cause. His daughter, particularly concerned, asked, "Did the governor call you, father? Why are you so anxious? Tell me, please." Initially reluctant to respond, fearing to upset her, the deputy finally explained, "I am in trouble on your account." He then revealed that the governor wanted her as his concubine. "If I had refused, I would have been killed, so I yielded. But a gentleman's daughter being made a concubine is a disgrace unheard of." The daughter made light of it and laughed. "Why did you not think it out better than that, father? Why should a grown man lose his life for the sake of a girl? Let the daughter go. By losing one daughter and saving your life, you surely do better than saving your daughter and losing your life. One can easily see where the greater advantage lies. A daughter does not count. Give her over. That's all. Don't for a moment think otherwise. Just put away your distress and anxiety. We women, every one of us, are under the ban, and such things are decreed by fate. I shall accept without any opposition, so please have no anxiety. It is settled now, and you, father, must yield and follow. If you do so, all will be well." The father sighed and said in reply, "Since you seem so willing, my mind is somewhat relieved." But from this time on, the whole house was in distress. The girl alone seemed perfectly unmoved, not showing the slightest sign of fear. She laughed as usual, her light and happy laugh, and her actions seemed wonderfully free. In a little while, the governor reached Sanchan on his rounds. He then called the deputy and said, "Make ready your daughter for tomorrow and all the things needed." The deputy came home and made preparation for the so-called wedding. The daughter said, "This is not a real wedding. It is only the taking of a concubine, but still make everything ready in the way of refreshments and ceremony as for a real marriage." So the father did as she requested. On the following day, the governor came to the house of the deputy. He was not dressed in his official robes, but came simply in the dress and hat of a commoner. When he went into the inner quarters, he met the daughter. She stood straight before him. Her two hands were lifted in ceremonial form, but instead of holding a fan to hide her face, she held a sword before her. She was very pretty. He gave a great start of surprise and asked the meaning of the knife that she held. She ordered her nurse to reply, who said, "Even though I am an obscure countrywoman, I do not forget that I am born of the gentry, and though your excellency is a high minister of state, still to take me by force is an unheard of dishonor. If you take me as your real and true wife, I'll serve you with all my heart, but if you are determined to take me as a concubine, I shall die now by this sword. For that reason I hold it. My life rests on one word from your excellency. Speak it, please, before I decide." The governor, though a man who observed no ceremony and never brooked a question, when he saw how beautiful and how determined this maiden was, fell a victim to her at once and said, "If you so decide, then, of course, I'll make you my real wife." Her answer was, "If you truly mean it, then please withdraw and write out the certificate. Send the gifts, provide the goose, dress in the proper way, come and let us go through the required ceremony, drink the pledge glass, and wed." The governor did as she suggested, carried out the forms to the letter, and they were married. She was not only a very pretty woman, but upright and true of soul, a rare person indeed. The governor took her home, loved her, and held her dear. He had, however, a real wife before and concubines, but he set them all aside and fixed his affections on this one only. She remonstrated with him over his wrongs and unrighteous acts, and he listened and made improvement. The world took note of it, and praised her as a true and wonderful woman. She counted herself the real wife, but the first wife treated her as a concubine, and all the relatives said likewise that she could never be considered a real wife. At that time, King Seijo, frequently, in the dress of a commoner, used to visit Han's house. Han entertained him royally with refreshments, which his wife used to bring and offer before him. He called her his little sister. On a certain day, King Seijo, as he was accustomed, came to the house, and while he was drinking, he suddenly saw the woman fall on her face before him. The king, in surprise, inquired as to what she could possibly mean by such an act. She then told all the story of her being taken by force and brought to Seoul. She wept while she said, "Though I am from a far distant part of the country, I am of the gentry by ancestry, and my husband took me with all the required ceremonies of a wife, so that I ought not to be counted a concubine. But there is no law in this land by which a second real wife may be taken after a first real wife exists, so they call me a concubine, a matter of deepest disgrace. Please, your majesty, take pity on me and decide my case." The king laughed and said, "This is a simple matter to settle. Why should my little sister make so great an affair of it and bow before me? I will decide your case at once. Come." He then wrote out with his own hand a document making her a real wife, and her children eligible for the highest office. He wrote it, signed it, stamped it, and gave it to her. From that time on, she was known as a real wife, in rank and standing equal to the first one. No further word was ever slightingly spoken, and her children shared in the affairs of state. Imbang. The resourceful wife. In the final year of King Yonsan's reign, a time of unprecedented wickedness plagued the kingdom. Yonsan himself was the root of many of these evils. He ordered his eunuchs and attendants to seize any women of notable beauty from the homes of the nobility, regardless of their status or the objections of their families. These women were taken by force to serve the king's desires, and he even shamelessly claimed that the wives of various ministers preferred him over their husbands and wanted to stay with him in the palace. Such audacious actions were widely known and left the people stunned and outraged. The king's tyranny and licentiousness led to his eventual downfall. With the support of his disillusioned subjects, he was dethroned, and King Cheongjong took his place. Amidst these turbulent times, there was a young wife of a high-ranking minister known for her exceptional beauty. One day, she received a summons to the palace. Unlike other women, who were terrified and despaired upon being called, she exhibited no fear. She calmly dressed and presented herself at the palace. When King Yonsan saw her, he ordered her to approach him. As she drew near, an unbearable stench suddenly filled the room. The king, repulsed, covered his nose with his fan, turned away, spat, and exclaimed, "Goodness, I can't tolerate this one. Take her away." Thus she was dismissed and avoided any further indignity. This clever escape was the result of her foresight and ingenuity. Anticipating that she might be summoned at any moment, she devised a plan to protect herself. She kept 2 pieces of rotting meat, foul and putrid, always on hand. On the day she was called to the palace, she placed these slices under her arms as she dressed. The resulting horrid smell was so overpowering and inexplicable that it saved her from the king's advances. Those who learned of her cunning praised her bravery and intelligence. Her quick thinking and courage not only preserved her honor, but also served as a remarkable example of resourcefulness in the face of tyranny. Source: Imbang. The boxed-up governor. A certain literary official was, at one time, the governor of the city of Gyeongju. Whenever he visited the mayor, it was his custom, upon encountering dancing girls, to tap them on the head with his pipe and declare, "These girls are devils, ogres, goblins. How can you tolerate them in your presence?" Naturally, this behavior made him unpopular. The mayor, in particular, detested the governor's conduct. In secret, the mayor sent a message to the dancing girls, proposing, "If any of you can, by any means, deceive this governor and put him to shame, I'll reward you richly." Among the girls was a young one, barely more than a child, who claimed she could. The governor lived in the quarter of the city where the Confucian temple was located, and he had only one servant, a young lad. The young dancing girl who undertook to ensnare him often passed by the main gateway of the temple, dressed as a common woman of the town. She would frequently call the governor's boy to her, sometimes showing just her profile, other times revealing her full form as she stood in the gateway. The boy would go out to meet her, and they would speak briefly before she departed. This happened once or twice a day and continued for some time. Curious about this frequent visitor, the governor eventually asked the boy, "Who is this woman that comes so often to call you?" "She is my sister," the boy replied. "Her husband left on a peddling journey over a year ago and has not yet returned. Consequently, she has no one else to help her, so she often comes to see me." One evening, while the boy was away eating his meal and the governor was alone, the woman came to the main gateway and called for the boy. The governor, seeing her, responded in his stead and invited her in. She entered, blushing and appearing very shy, standing modestly aside. The governor said, "My boy is absent right now, but I need a light for my pipe. Could you please get one?" She brought the light, and then he asked, "Would you sit down and smoke a little with me?" She replied, "How could I dare do such a thing?" He insisted, "There is no one else here now. Never mind." Seeing no way to refuse, she complied and smoked a little. The governor, finding himself suddenly charmed by her, confessed, "I have seen many beautiful women, but you are the prettiest of them all. Since seeing you, I have forgotten how to eat or sleep. Could you come to live with me here? I am quite alone and no one will know." She feigned shock, exclaiming, "Your Excellency is a noble, and I am a low-class woman. How can you suggest such a thing? Is this a joke?" He assured her, "I mean it truly, no joke at all." To emphasize his sincerity, he swore an oath, "I mean every word." She then said, "Since you speak so earnestly, I am truly grateful and shall come." Overjoyed, he exclaimed, "Meeting you thus is wonderful indeed. However," she added, "there is another matter. I understand that where your Excellency is now staying is a very sacred place, and that, according to ancient law, men are forbidden to have women here. Is that true?" The governor, placing a hand on her shoulder, said, "Well, really now, how do you know this? You are right. What shall we do about it?" She made answer, "If you'll depend on me, I'll arrange a plan. My home is nearby, and I am also alone, so if you come quietly at night to me, we can meet and no one will know. I shall send a felt hat by the boy, and you can wear that for disguise. With this commoner's felt hat on, no one will know you." The governor was greatly delighted and said, "How is it that you can plan so wonderfully? I shall do as you suggest. Now you be sure to be on hand." He repeated this 2 or 3 times. The woman went and entered the house indicated. When evening came, she sent the hat by the boy. The governor arrived as agreed, and she received him, lit the lamp, and brought him refreshments and drink. They talked and drank together, and he called her to come to him. The woman hesitated for a moment when suddenly there was a call heard from the outside, and a great disturbance took place. She bent her head to listen and then gave a cry of alarm, saying, "That's the voice of my husband who has come. I was unfortunate, and so had this miserable wretch apportioned to my lot. He is the most despicable among mortals. For murder and arson he has no equal. 3 years ago he left me, and I took another husband, and we've had nothing to do with each other since. I can't imagine why he should come now. He is evidently very drunk too, from the sound of his voice. Your Excellency has really fallen into a terrible plight. What shall I do?" The woman went out then and answered, saying, "Who comes thus at midnight to make such a disturbance?" The voice replied, "Don't you know my voice? Why don't you open the door?" She answered, "Are you not Cholo, Brass Tiger, and have we not separated for good years ago? Why have you come?" The voice from outside answered back, "Your leaving me and taking another man has always been a matter of deepest resentment on my part. I have something special to say to you," and he pounded the door open and came thundering in. The woman rushed back into the room, saying, "Your Excellency must escape in some way or other." In such a little thatched hut, there was no place possible for concealment but an empty rice box only. "Please get into this," said she, and she lifted the lid and hurried him in. The governor, in his haste and déshabille, was bundled into the box. He then heard from within this fellow come into the room and quarrel with his wife. She said, "We have been separated 3 years already. What reason have you to come now and make such a disturbance?" Said he, "You cast me off and took another man, therefore I have come for the clothes that I left and the other things that belong to me." Then she threw out his belongings to him, but he said, pointing to the box, "That's mine." She replied, "That's not yours. I bought that myself with 2 rolls of silk goods." "But," said he, "one of those rolls I gave you, and I'm not going to let you have it." "Even though you did give it, do you mean to say that for 1 roll of silk you will carry away this box? I'll not consent to it." Thus they quarreled and contradicted each other. "If you don't give me the box," said he, "I'll enter a suit against you at the mayor's." A little later, the day dawned, and so he had the box carried off to the mayor's office to have the case decided by law, while the woman followed. When they entered the court, already the mayor was seated in the judgment place, and here they presented their case concerning the box. The mayor, after hearing, decided thus: "Since you each have a half share in its purchase, there is nothing for me to do but to divide it between you. Bring a saw," said he. The servants brought the saw and began on the box, when suddenly from the inner regions came forth a cry, "Save me! Oh, save me!" The mayor, in pretended astonishment, said, "Why, there's a man's voice from the inside," and ordered that it should be opened. The servants managed to find the key, and at last the lid came back, and from the inner quarters there came forth a half-dressed man. On seeing him, the whole place was put into convulsions of laughter, for it was none other than the governor. "How is it that your Excellency finds yourself in this box in this unaccountable way?" asked the mayor. "Please come out." The governor, huddling himself together as well as he could, climbed onto the open veranda. He held his head down and nearly died of shame. The mayor, splitting his sides with laughter, ordered clothes to be brought, and the first thing that came was a woman's green dress coat. The governor hastily turned it inside out, slipped it on, and made a dash for his quarters in the Confucian temple. That day he left the place never to return, and even to the present time in Gyeongju they laugh and tell the story of the boxed-up governor.
The man who lost his legs. There was a merchant in Cheongju who used to go to Quelpart to buy seaweed. One time, when he drew up on the shore, he saw a man shuffling along the ground toward the boat. The man crept nearer and finally took hold of the side with both his hands and jumped in. "When I looked at him," said the merchant, "I found he was an old man without any legs. Astonished, I asked, 'How is it, old man, that you have lost your legs?' He replied, 'I lost my legs on a trip once when I was shipwrecked, and a great fish bit them off.' 'How did that happen?' inquired the merchant. The old man said, 'We were caught in a gale and driven until we touched on some island. Before us on the shore stood a high castle with a great gateway. The 20 or so of us who were together in the storm-tossed boat were all exhausted from cold and hunger and lying exposed. We landed and managed to go together to the house. There was only one man in it, whose height was terrible to behold, and whose chest was many spans around. His face was black and his eyes large and rolling. His voice was like the braying of a monstrous donkey. Our people made motions showing that they wanted something to eat. The man made no reply but securely fastened the front gate. After this, he brought an armful of wood, put it in the middle of the courtyard, and made a fire. When the fire blazed up, he rushed after us, caught a young lad from our company, cooked him before our eyes, pulled him to pieces, and ate him. We were all reduced to a state of horror, not knowing what to do. We gazed at each other in dismay and stupefaction. When he had eaten his fill, he went up into a veranda and opened a jar, from which he drank some kind of spirit. After drinking it, he uttered the most gruesome and awful noises. His face grew very red, and he lay down and slept. His snoring was like the roaring of thunder. We planned then to make our escape and tried to open the large gate, but one leaf was about 24 feet across and so thick and heavy that with all our strength we could not move it. The walls, too, were 150 feet high, so we could do nothing with them. We were like fish in a pot, beyond all possible ways of escape. We held each other's hands and cried. Among us, one man devised a plan. We had a knife, and he took it. While the monster was drunk and asleep, he decided to stab its eyes and cut its throat. We replied, "We are all doomed to death anyway, let's try," and we made our way onto the veranda and stabbed its eyes. It gave an awful roar and struck out on all sides to catch us. We rushed here and there, escaping out of the court and into the rear garden. In this enclosure, there were about 60 pigs and sheep. We rushed in among them. The monster floundered about, waving its arms after us, but it didn't catch any of us. We were all mixed up, sheep, pigs, and people. When it did catch something, it was either a sheep or a pig. So it opened the front gate to send all the animals out. We each took a pig or sheep on our backs and made straight for the gate. The monster felt each one, and finding it to be a pig or a sheep, let it go. Thus, we all got out and rushed for the boat. A little later, it came and sat on the bank, roaring threats at us. A lot of other giants came at its call. They took steps of 30 feet or so, racing after us, catching the boat and making it fast. But we took axes and struck at the hands that held it, and so got free at last and out to the open sea. Again, a great wind arose, and we ran onto the rocks and were all destroyed. Everyone was engulfed in the sea and drowned. I alone got hold of a piece of boat timber and survived. Then a horrible fish from the sea came swimming after me and bit off my legs. At last, I drifted back home, and here I am. When I think of it still, my teeth chatter and my bones shiver. My 8 lucky stars are very bad. That's why it happened to me. I hope this helps.
10,000 devils. Han Chunkyom was the son of a provincial secretary. He enrolled in 1579 and graduated in 1586. He received the final wishes of King Sanjo, sitting by his side taking notes for 7 hours. From 1608 to 1623, he served as the generalissimo of the army, and later was elevated to the rank of prince. A certain Prince Han of Chongchong province had a distant relative who was an uncouth countryman living in extreme poverty. This relative visited him from time to time. Han pitied his cold and hungry condition, gave him clothes to wear, and shared his food, urging him to stay and often extending his visits to several months. He felt sorry for him, but disliked his uncouthness and stupidity. On one visit, the poor relative suddenly announced his intention to return home, although the New Year's season was at hand. Han urged him to remain, saying, "It would be better for you to be comfortably housed at my home, eating cake and soup and enjoying quiet sleep, rather than riding through wind and weather at this time of year." Initially resistant, the relative eventually yielded to Han's insistence to stay. On New Year's Eve, he revealed to Prince Han, "I possess a peculiar kind of magic, by which I have under my control all manner of evil genii. The New Year is when I call them up, review their names, and inspect them. If I neglect this, I would lose control altogether, and it would cause trouble among mortals. It is a matter of great importance, which is why I wish to go. Since you have detained me, I shall have to summon them at your Excellency's house and inspect them. I hope you will not object." Han, greatly astonished and alarmed, consented. The poor relative continued, "This is an extremely important matter, and I would like to use your central guest hall." Han agreed, so that night they washed and scoured the floors. The relative positioned himself with all dignity facing south, while Prince Han took up his station outside to observe. Soon he witnessed a variety of demons crush in at the door, horrible in appearance and awesome in manner. They lined up one after another until they filled the entire court, each bowing before the master, who, At that point, drew out a book, opened it, and began calling off names. Demon guards standing by the threshold repeated the call and checked off names, as in a government yamen. This continued from the second watch until the 5th hour of the morning. Han remarked, "It was indeed no lie when he told me 10,000 devils." One latecomer arrived after the roll call had ended, and another came by climbing over the wall. The man ordered them to be arrested and questioned thoroughly. The late arrival explained, "Lately, life has been harsh for me, and to survive, I had to resort to infecting a scholar's household in Yongnam with smallpox. It's a distant place, so I arrived too late for the roll call, which is a serious fault, I admit." The one who climbed the wall said, "I too have faced poverty and hunger. I had to introduce typhus into the household of a gentleman in Kyongkoi. When I heard the roll call was imminent, I rushed here in fear of arriving late and climbed the wall, which was indeed a sin." The man then loudly rebuked them, saying, "These criminals disobeyed my orders, caused illness, and committed serious sins. Moreover, they trespassed on a high official's property by climbing the wall." He ordered them to receive 100 lashes, wear the kang, and be locked in prison. Turning to the others, he instructed sternly, "Do not spread disease. Do you understand?" He repeated this admonition 3 times and emphasized it 5 times before dismissing them. The group of offenders departed, creating a clamor as they left through the gate. After a long time, they had all disappeared. Prince Han, who had been watching, saw the man now sitting alone in the hall. Everything was quiet, and the others had vanished. The cocks crowed, and morning arrived. Han was greatly astonished and asked about the legal principles behind such actions. The poor relation replied, "When I was young, I studied in a mountain monastery. There was an old priest there who had a unique appearance. He seemed frail and near death. The other priests mocked him and treated him with disdain. Only I showed him kindness, sharing my food and treating him well. One evening, under the bright moonlight, the old priest said to me, 'There's a cave behind this monastery with a breathtaking view. Will you come with me and see it?' I went with him, and when we crossed over the hills into the quiet night, he took a book from his robe and gave it to me, saying, 'I, old and nearing death, hold a great secret here. I've sought someone worthy throughout Korea and finally found you. My heart is content. Please take it.' I opened the book and discovered it was a catalog listing of demons, with magical inscriptions scattered throughout, and an explanation of the laws that govern the spirit world. The old priest transcribed a magical formula. Upon igniting it, numerous demons gathered, greatly alarming me. He then sat with me, calling out their names one by one, and instructed the demons, 'I am old now and departing. Therefore I entrust you to this young man. Obey him, and all will be well.' Already in possession of the book, I summoned them to me, read aloud the new commands, and dismissed them. The old priest and I returned to the temple and slept. I awoke early the next morning to visit him, but he had vanished. Thus, I acquired the knowledge of magic and have wielded it for over 20 years. What the world remains ignorant of, I now reveal to your excellency." Han was utterly astonished and asked, "Could I also attain this marvelous skill?" The man responded, "Your excellency possesses great talent and can accomplish remarkable feats. However, the possessor of this craft must be someone poor, despised, and of no account. As a minister, it would not be suitable for you." The following day, he departed abruptly and never returned. Han sent a servant with a message to him. The servant finally located him amidst 1,000 mountain peaks, residing in a tiny straw hut no larger than a cockleshell. No neighbors, no one else. He called out to him, but the man refused to come. Another messenger was dispatched to invite him, yet he had already departed without a trace. Prince Han's children had heard this tale directly from him, and I, the author, received it from them. Imbang, the home of the fairies. In the days of King Injo, 1623 to 1649, there was a student of Confucius living in Kapyong, a young man who was unmarried and had received only a modest education in history and literature. For some reason, he left his home and traveled into Kangwon province with a servant, journeying on horseback until they encountered a mountain where they were caught in a heavy rain. Mysteriously, his servant suddenly passed away, leaving the young man alone and distraught. He moved the servant's body to the hillside and continued on his way, overcome with sorrow. Shortly after, his horse collapsed under him and died as well. Now alone, soaked by the rain on an unfamiliar road, he broke down in tears. At that moment, an old man with striking eyes and hair as white as snow approached him. He asked why the young man was crying, and in response to his tale of woe, the death of his servant and horse, the rain, and his lost way, the elder took pity. Raising his staff, he pointed towards a house beyond the pine trees, instructing him to follow the stream to find people. Following the old man's directions, the young man soon spotted a cluster of trees in the distance. Expressing his gratitude, he set off on the path indicated. Glancing back a few steps later, he found that the old man had vanished. Puzzled yet determined, he continued towards the grove of towering pines and abundant bamboo beside a wide flowing stream. Beneath its clear waters, he glimpsed a marble floor resembling a vast, flawless pavement. The water was uniformly shallow, easy to cross, leading him further until he came upon a splendidly adorned house with flawless pillars and entrances. Despite his drenched state, clutching his thorn staff, he entered through the gate and took a seat to rest. The courtyard, paved in seamless marble like polished glass, held only a marble table with the Book of Changes and a jade brazier emitting fragrant incense. Amidst the tranquil scene, undisturbed by wind or commotion, the young man felt the chaos of the world recede from him. As he sat in astonishment, he heard footsteps behind the building. Startled, he turned to see an elderly man of venerable appearance, dressed in green and carrying a 9-section jade staff. His presence was dignified and ageless, resembling that of a sage or immortal. Recognizing him as the master of the house, the young man approached and bowed deeply. The old man greeted him warmly and declared, "I am the master, and I have awaited your arrival for a long time." Taking him by the hand, he led him onward. As they journeyed, the hills grew increasingly enchanting, and gentle breezes and light bestowed upon him a mysterious favor. Suddenly, when he looked again, the man had vanished. Thus he continued alone until he soon arrived at another palace, also constructed of precious stones. It stretched out magnificently before him, its grandeur surpassing even the royal palace in Seoul where he had attended examinations. Approaching the gate, he was received by a figure clad in ceremonial robes who ushered him inside. Passing several pavilions, he finally reached a special one and ascended to the upper floor. There, reclining at a table, sat the ancient sage whom he had encountered previously. Once more he bowed respectfully. This young man, raised humbly in the countryside, was unaccustomed to the company of nobility. Overwhelmed with awe, he dared not raise his eyes. Nevertheless, the elderly master welcomed him again and invited him to sit, remarking, "This is not the dusty world you are accustomed to, but the abode of genies. I knew you would come, so I awaited your arrival." Turning to summon someone, he said, "Bring food for our guest." Shortly after, a servant brought a table laden with sumptuous dishes. The fare was unlike anything seen on earth, plentiful and exotic. The young man, despite his hunger, ate heartily of these strange delicacies. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared away, the old man spoke again. "I have a daughter of marriageable age, and I have been seeking a son-in-law without success. Your arrival aligns with this need. Stay here and become my son-in-law." Bewildered, the young man bowed silently. The host then instructed, "Summon the children." 2 boys around 12 or 13 years old hurried in and seated themselves beside him. Their faces gleamed with a radiance akin to jewels. The master gestured towards them and announced to the guest, "These are my sons." Turning to the boys, he declared, "This young man is the one I have chosen as my son-in-law. Choose an auspicious day for the wedding and inform me." The 2 boys counted the days on their fingers and simultaneously declared, "The day after tomorrow is an auspicious day." The old man turned to the stranger and proclaimed, "The wedding day is set. You must now wait in the guest chamber until the appointed time." Then he instructed someone to summon a particular individual. Shortly thereafter, an official of the genies appeared, dressed in ethereal attire. His countenance was radiant and joyful, embodying a spirit of happiness and contentment. The master instructed, "Guide this young man to his quarters and treat him with respect until the wedding day." The official led him out, and as he passed through the gate, a red sedan chair awaited him. Upon mounting it, 8 bearers carried him smoothly away. After a mile or so, They arrived at another splendid palace, flawless in its beauty. Amid elegant gardens of flowers and trees, he descended to enter his pavilion. From jeweled boxes, beautiful garments were brought forth, and he was treated to a perfumed bath and a change of attire. Thus, he exchanged his worn-out clothes for the garments of the celestial beings. The official remained his companion until the appointed time. On the wedding day, more exquisite robes were presented, and he bathed and changed again. Once dressed, he rode in the palanquin to the master's palace, accompanied by 20 or more officials. Upon arrival, a guide directed them to the Palace Beautiful, where preparations for the wedding were underway. He paid his respects and then proceeded further inside. The air was filled with the tinkling of jade bells and the fragrance of sweet perfumes as he entered the inner quarters. Many beautiful women awaited him, adorned in splendid attire like heavenly goddesses. Among them he anticipated meeting the master's daughter. Soon, accompanied by a retinue, she appeared, radiant in jewels and exquisite clothing that illuminated the palace. He stood before her, though her face was veiled by a pearl fan. When he finally beheld her, her beauty dazzled him. Compared to her, the other women seemed ordinary, like magpies to a phoenix. Overwhelmed, he dared not raise his eyes. His companion guided him through the necessary rituals and bows, similar to those among men. After the ceremony, he returned to his bridal chamber. The next day, his mother-in-law summoned him. She appeared about 30 years old, her face as fresh as a newly bloomed lotus flower. A grand feast followed, with many guests and music sweeter than mortal ears had ever heard. After dining well, the women lifted their skirts and sleeves, dancing and singing in perfect harmony. Their voices were so enchanting that even the clouds seemed to pause and listen. As the day concluded and the feast ended, everyone departed contentedly. A young man, raised in a country hut, suddenly encountered the chief of the genies and became a participant in his glory and his way of life. His mind was overwhelmed and his thoughts were in turmoil. Doubts mingled with fears. He did not know what to do. He had indeed become a sharer in the joys of the fairies, and a year or so passed in such delight that no words can adequately describe it. One day, his wife asked him, "Would you like to enter the inner sanctuary and see as the fairies do?" He eagerly replied, "I would gladly." She then led him to a special park with beautiful paths surrounded by green hills. As they walked, they encountered delightful scenes: springs of water, sparkling waterfalls, jeweled flowers, and shimmering spray. The scenery became increasingly enchanting, with lovely birds and animals playing about. Once someone entered here, they would never think of returning to Earth. After this, they ascended the tallest peak, resembling a tower with many levels. Before him stretched a vast sea dotted with blessed islands and expansive lands. His wife pointed out each one to him, filled with golden palaces and bathed in a halo of light. They were inhabited by joyful souls, some riding cranes, phoenixes, or unicorns, some sitting on clouds, sailing on the wind, walking on air, or gently gliding up streams, others descending from above or moving west and north in groups. Sweet strains of flutes and harps filled the air. The sights were so numerous and astonishing that he could never recount them all. After the day passed, they returned. Their joy remained unbroken, and 2 years later she bore him 2 sons. Time passed until one day, unexpectedly, as he sat with his wife, tears began to flow down his face. Astonished, she asked the reason for his tears. "I was thinking," he said, "about how a simple countryman living in poverty became the son-in-law of the king of the genies. But in my homeland is my poor old mother, whom I haven't seen all these years. I long to see her, and that's why tears come." His wife chuckled and said, "Do you truly wish to see her? Then go, but don't weep." She informed her father that her husband wished to visit his mother. The chief summoned him and granted permission. The son assumed many servants would accompany him in grandeur, but that was not the case. His wife handed him a small bundle, and that was all. He bid farewell to his father-in-law, who said, "Go now, see your mother, and soon I'll call for you." Accompanied by just one servant, he departed through the main gate. There he saw a thin, poor horse with a ragged saddle. He looked closely and realized it was his deceased horse and servant, both restored to life. Startled, he asked, "How did you come here?" The servant replied, "I was traveling with you on the road when someone abducted me and brought me here. I didn't know why, but I've been here for a long time. Filled with fear, the man quickly packed his belongings and resumed his journey. The genie servant followed behind, but after a short distance, the magical world transformed back into the familiar world of hardships, with its fogs, thorns, and cliffs. He glanced towards the genie realm, now seeming like a dream. Overwhelmed with emotion, he broke down in tears. Seeing him weep, the genie servant said, "You've spent years in the realm of immortals, yet haven't truly transcended, as you still cling to the 7 earthly things: anger, sorrow, fear, ambition, hate, and selfishness. Once you let go of these, there will be no more tears for you." Hearing this, he stopped crying, wiped his cheeks, and apologized. Continuing for another mile, he found himself on the main road. The servant told him, "You know the way from here, so I'll return." And so the young man finally reached home. At home, they were conducting an exorcism. Witches and spirit worshippers were praying. Seeing the young man return, the family was shocked. "It's his ghost," they murmured, until they realized it was truly him. The mother demanded why he hadn't returned sooner. Knowing her volatile nature, he dared not tell her the truth and fabricated a story. It happened to be the anniversary of his supposed death, hence the prayer ceremony. He opened the bundle his wife had given him and found 4 sets of clothes, one for each season. A year later, his mother arranged a marriage with the daughter of a village scholar. Timid and fearing his mother's wrath, he acquiesced, but the marriage lacked happiness, and they barely looked at each other. He confided in his childhood friend about his absence in marriage in the genie realm. The friend was astounded, especially by the strange, durable clothes that never dirtied or wore out, adapting perfectly to each season. 3 years later, a servant arrived with 2 sons from the genie master, along with a message. "Next year, your village will be destroyed, and its people will perish. Follow this messenger, and come with all of you." He shared this with his friend, showing him the sons who resembled silk and jade. The friend informed the mother, who agreed eagerly. They sold their possessions, hosted a grand feast for the town, then bid farewell. This was in 1635. They departed and were never seen again. The following year, the Manchu invasion ravaged the young man's village. Even today, in Kapyong, young and old recount this tale. The Honest Witch. Song Sang-in enrolled in 1601. He was known for his fairness and was feared by corrupt elements in the court. He graduated in 1605 and became a provincial governor. During the turbulent reign of King Kwang Hai, he faced near-death experiences and was exiled to Quelpart for 10 years. But in the spring of 1623, he was recalled. The story. There once lived a Korean named Song Sang-in, whose mind was principled and his spirit unwavering. He held a deep disdain for witches, viewing them as swindlers who exploited the people. Through their alleged prayers, he declared, they plunder the people's possessions. Their folly and extravagance know no bounds. Their beliefs are pure nonsense. If only I could eradicate them from this earth and obliterate their names forever. Sometime later, Song was appointed magistrate of Namwon County in Chula Province. Upon his arrival, he issued a stern decree. Any witch found in this county shall be beaten to death. The area was rigorously monitored, causing all witches to flee to neighboring prefectures. Satisfied, the magistrate thought, now we are free of them. This county, at least, is cleansed. One day, while taking a stroll and resting at Kwanghan Pavilion, Song observed a woman approaching on horseback with a mudang's drum atop her head. Peering closely, he was astounded to recognize her as a mudang witch. He promptly dispatched a yamen runner to arrest her, and upon her arrival, he asked sternly, "Are you a mudang?" She calmly replied, "Yes, I am." "And did you not hear about the official decree?" he inquired. "Yes, I heard," she confirmed. Song pressed further, "Are you not afraid of death, lingering in this county?" The mudang bowed respectfully and responded, "Your Excellency, I have a grievance to present for your consideration. Please hear me out. There are genuine mudangs and false ones. False mudangs deserve death. But surely you would not kill an honest mudang, would you? Your orders target the false mudangs. I do not believe they apply to those of us who are honest. I am an honest mudang. I trusted you would spare me, so I chose to stay in peace." Intrigued, the magistrate queried, "How do you discern between honest and false mudangs?" The woman replied, "Let's put the matter to the test and see. If I am not proven honest, let me die." "Very well," said the magistrate, "but can you really make good, and do you truly know how to call back departed spirits?" The Mudang answered, "I can." The magistrate suddenly thought of an intimate friend who had been dead for some time, and he said to her, "I had a friend of such and such rank in soul. Can you call his spirit back to me?" The Mudang replied, "Let me do so, but first you must prepare food with wine and serve it properly." The magistrate thought for a moment and then said to himself, "It is a serious matter to take a person's life. Let me find out first if she is true or not, and then decide." So he had the food brought. The Mudang said also, "I want a suit of your clothes too, please." This was brought, and she spread her mat in the courtyard, placed the food in order, donned the dress, and so made all preliminary arrangements. She then lifted her eyes toward heaven and uttered the strange magic sounds by which spirits are called, meanwhile shaking a tinkling bell. In a little she turned and said, "I've come." Then she began telling the sad story of his sickness and death, and their separation. She reminded the magistrate of how they had played together and of things that had happened when they were at school and in their lessons, of the difficulties they had met in the examinations, of experiences that had come to them during their terms of office. She told secrets that they had confided to each other as intimate friends, and many matters most definitely that only they two knew. Not a single mistake did she make, but told the truth in every detail. The magistrate, when he heard these things, began to cry, saying, "The soul of my friend is really present. I can no longer doubt or deny it." Then he ordered the choicest fare possible to be prepared as a sacrifice to his friend. In a little the friend bade him farewell and took his departure. The magistrate said, "Alas, I thought Mudangs were a brood of liars, but now I know that there are true Mudangs as well as false." He gave her rich rewards, sent her away in safety, recalled his order against witches, and refrained from any matters pertaining to them forever after. Imbang. In the days of King Sejong, students from the Confucian College gathered for a spring festival picnic in a wood near a beautiful spring. They indulged in drinking and feasting throughout the night, leaving the college rooms deserted. However, one student from the countryside, considered insignificant by others, felt it was his duty to remain behind and guard the sacred precincts of the temple while the others enjoyed themselves. Meanwhile, the king sent a eunuch to check how many students had stayed behind. The eunuch reported that all had left except for one countryman, who was vigilantly standing guard alone. Impressed by this, the king summoned the student to his presence, dressed in his ordinary clothes. Upon meeting him, the king asked, "Why did you choose to stay alone while everyone else went off to enjoy themselves?" The student replied, "I also wished to join the festivities, but leaving the sacred temple completely unguarded did not seem right to me, so I remained." The king was pleased with his answer and inquired further, "Do you know how to write poetry?" The student modestly replied, "I know only a little about it." The king then presented him with the first half of a verse. "After the rains, the mountains weep." He challenged the student to complete the verse. Without hesitation, the student responded, "Before the wind, the grass is tipsy." Impressed by his wisdom and poetic skill, the king honored the student, recognizing his sense of duty and his talent. The king, overjoyed, commended his talent and immediately conferred upon him a special graduation, presenting him with a diploma, adorning his hat with flowers, and declaring through a proclamation that he had successfully passed the Al-Song examination. Without delay, the king arranged for him to receive ceremonial headgear, a red coat, a horse for riding, 2 boys as attendants, flute players, and harpers, instructing him, "Now, proceed to the gathering and display yourself." As the picnickers enjoyed their festivities, they suddenly heard the melodies of flutes and harps and wondered at the source. It was not customary for new graduates to appear at such events. Upon looking closer, they beheld a triumphant candidate, attired in ceremonial garments, escorted by boys, and riding the king's steed to greet them. Upon inquiry, they discovered with astonishment that he was the rustic countryman they had left behind at the temple. Confounded by this revelation of royal favor, the assembly dispersed in confusion and returned home immediately. This distinguished graduate later became a great and renowned figure, thanks to the king's benevolence. Yimbang. The Fortunes of Yu. There once lived a man named Yu in Yeongnam during the reign of King Ashage. He was well educated in the classics, had passed his examinations, and held a minor position at the Confucian College. Despite his qualifications, he was of low rank, which meant advancement was nearly impossible. Being from the countryside, he lacked connections and influence in Seoul where he lived. Disheartened and lonely, Yu decided to return to his rural home. Before leaving, a palace secretary who knew Yu came to bid him farewell. Seizing the opportunity, Yu expressed his desire to see the royal office of the secretaries, a place he had never visited despite his time in Seoul. The secretary explained the difficulties of gaining access during the day due to the crowds and strict regulations, but revealed his plan to spend the night there, allowing them a chance to explore in the evening. Although unusual, the secretary arranged for Yu to be escorted into the palace the next day. As planned, Yu entered the palace grounds that evening, only to find himself alone as the secretary had not arrived. The gates closed behind him, trapping him inside. Fortunately, a servant of the secretary took pity on Yu and provided him a hidden corner to spend the night safely, promising to help him leave discreetly in the morning. Unable to sleep, Yu decided to explore quietly. During the rainy season, part of the palace wall had collapsed, providing Yu an unintended entry into the royal quarters. He found himself in a magnificent garden adorned with trees, lakes, and pathways. Lost in admiration, he wondered whose residence this could be. Suddenly, a man approached. He wore a new cap and carried a staff, accompanied by a servant. It was none other than King Sejong himself, taking a leisurely stroll under the moonlight with one of his eunuchs. When Yu encountered the king, he had no inkling of his majesty's identity. The king inquired sharply, "Who are you? And how did you enter here?" Yu explained his predicament, recounting how he had entered with the secretary who had failed him, leading to the gates being closed and him being confined for the night. Spying the moonlight and discovering a breached wall, he seized the opportunity to climb over. Curiously, he asked, "Whose residence is this?" The king revealed, "I am the owner of this house." He then invited Yu inside, seating him on a mat beside him, and they engaged in conversation. Learning that Yu had excelled in the classics, but struggled to secure a significant position due to his humble origins and lack of influential connections, the king sympathized. Yu expressed his disillusionment, contemplating a return to his hometown to live out his days. Inquiring further, the king asked, "You are knowledgeable in the classics. Do you also understand the Book of Changes?" Yu admitted, "I am familiar with the basics, but not the deeper intricacies." Intrigued, the king ordered a eunuch to fetch the Book of Changes, which he was studying at the time. Illuminated by the moonlight, they examined a passage that had perplexed the king, and Yu elucidated it, explaining each character with clarity and conviction. Impressed, the king and Yu spent the entire night studying together. As they parted ways at dawn, the king lamented, "With all your knowledge, you have never been utilized. Alas, for my kingdom." Yu expressed a desire to depart immediately, but the king cautioned him against leaving too early to avoid the scrutiny of the guards. He instructed Yu to return to his previous location and wait until daylight before leaving through the open gate. Upon returning home the next morning, Yu received a surprise visit from a royal secretary who appointed him as the overseer of literature. This announcement stirred controversy among the officials, who gathered in protest at the palace courtyard, questioning the appointment of an unknown figure to such a prestigious position. The king responded to their objections, saying, "If you are so opposed, I will reconsider." However, the very next day, he elevated Yu to an even higher office. Once again, the officials voiced their discontent, prompting the king to retort, "Truly, if you object so strongly, I will abandon the matter altogether." The day after, he appointed him to an even higher office. Once again, there was protest from all, and he seemed to yield to them. However, the following day, he promoted him even higher, and again the protests poured in, so much so that the king appeared to acquiesce. On the subsequent day, His Majesty personally penned an appointment for him as vice president of all the literati. The senior officials gathered once more, deliberating on what the king intended and how best to respond. If we don't intervene somehow, he'll appoint him as president of the literati, they concluded. They decided to temporarily set the issue aside and reconsider their options later. A royal banquet was announced, gathering all the officials. During this event, the high ministers of state quietly approached the king, expressing, "It is not suitable for someone so obscure to hold such a crucial position. Your Majesty's rapid promotions have greatly unsettled the entire official body. Despite our objections, you continue to elevate him. Could your Majesty please explain the reason for this?" The king remained silent, but directed a eunuch to bring the Book of Changes. Opening it to a particularly challenging section, he sought its interpretation. Not even the highest ministers could provide an answer. He queried each by name, yet all remained silent. Finally, the king remarked, "I have a profound interest in the Book of Changes. It is the esteemed scripture of the sages. Anyone who comprehends it surely deserves promotion. Yet, none of you grasp its essence, whereas you, whom you oppose, has elucidated it for me completely. Now, what do you have to say? Yu's promotion is entirely justified. Why do you persist in objection? I will continue to elevate him further and further, so cease all opposition." Fearing embarrassment, they dared not raise the issue again and fell silent. Yu, from that moment onward, became the royal teacher of the Chuyuk, Book of Changes, steadily advancing in rank until he eventually became head of the Confucian College, wielding unparalleled influence. Note, many talented individuals often lack opportunities for advancement. It is challenging for one's abilities to be recognized in high places, even more so in the presence of a king. The good fortune that befell the first scholar was divinely ordained. Through his diligent care of an empty house, honor came to him, leading to his promotion. The other's unauthorized entry into the palace was a significant transgression, yet he was pardoned, received, and honored by royal favor. Through a single line of poetry, a man's talents were revealed, and through an explanation of the Chuyuk, another's path to high office was opened. If Sejong had not been a wise and enlightened king, such events would not have occurred. Such occurrences are exceedingly rare, leaving all to marvel at what transpired with these two individuals. However, I am more astonished by the king's discernment in discovering them. His virtue and achievements are renowned to this day, earning him the title of Korea's King of the Golden Age. An encounter with a hobgoblin. In the year Pyeongseon, I found myself in trouble and was imprisoned. A military man named Choi Won-so, who was the captain of the guard, was also involved and locked up. We often met in prison and passed the time talking. One day, our conversation turned to goblins, and Captain Choi said, "When I was young, I encountered a hobgoblin that nearly cost me my life. It was a strange experience indeed." I asked him to tell me about it, and he began, "At that time, I didn't have a home in Seoul, but I heard there was a vacant place in Belttown, so I applied and got it. My father and the rest of the family stayed in the inner quarters while I lived in the front room. One late night, as I was half asleep, the door suddenly opened and a woman entered and stood in front of the lamp. I could see her clearly and recognized her from the home of a scholar friend. I had admired her beauty before, but never had a chance to meet her. Seeing her enter the room, I greeted her warmly, but she didn't respond. I tried to approach her, but she began to walk backwards, eluding my grasp. I hurried after her, but she continued her backward retreat until she opened the gate with a kick and vanished. I searched everywhere, but there was no trace of her. I thought she must have hidden herself and didn't consider anything else. The next night, she appeared again in front of the lamp just as before. I got up and tried once more to reach her, but she repeated her strange backward walk and disappeared through the gate, as she had done the night before. I was surprised and disappointed again, but I still didn't suspect she might be a hobgoblin. A few days later at night, as I lay down, I heard a crackling sound from above the ceiling, like paper being crumpled. It was eerie and unsettling in the darkness. Moments later, a curtain descended, dividing the room in two. Then, a large fire of coals dropped right in front of me, filling the room with intense heat. I felt trapped, fearing for my life with no way out. As the first cock crowed in the morning, the noise stopped, the curtain lifted, and the fire disappeared. The room was completely clean, as if nothing had happened. The next night I was alone again, but hadn't yet undressed or lain down when a large, strong man suddenly opened the door and entered. He wore a soldier's felt hat on his head and a blue tunic similar to those worn by Yamen underlings. He grabbed me and tried to pull me out. Being young and strong then, I resisted him, and we began to struggle. The moon was bright, and the night was clear. But despite my efforts, he managed to drag me into the courtyard. He lifted me up and spun me around, then carried me to the highest terrace and threw me down, leaving me dazed. He stood in front of me, keeping me captive. There was a garden behind the house, enclosed by a wall. I looked and saw about a dozen people inside, all wearing military hats and coats. They shouted, "Don't hurt him! Don't hurt him!" The man who had assaulted me responded, "It's none of your business. None of your business." But they continued to plead, "Don't hurt him! Don't hurt him!" He retorted, "Never mind. It's none of your business." They cried out, "He is a gentleman of the military class. Do not harm him." He simply replied, "Even if he is, it's none of your business," and then took me by both hands and threw me up into the air. I soared halfway to heaven and then began to descend, passing over Gyeonggi province and Chungcheong until finally landing in Chula. During my flight, I saw all the county towns of the 3 provinces clearly. Once again in Chula, he threw me up into the air, and again I shot skyward, falling northward until I found myself back home, lying dazed under the veranda terrace. I could hear the voices from the garden shouting, "Don't harm him, harm him." But the man said, "It's none of your business, your business." He lifted me up again and threw me into the air, and I sped off to Chula and returned several times in total. Finally, someone from the garden group stepped forward, took my tormentor by the hand, and led him away. They gathered briefly to discuss and laugh about the incident before dispersing, never to be seen again. I lay still at the base of the terrace until the next morning, when my father found me, took charge of me, and cared for me until I regained consciousness. We all left the haunted house and never returned. Note, there are various reasons why a place might be called a haunted house. The presence of hobgoblins makes it haunted. If a good or superior man enters such a place, the goblins flee and it ceases to be considered haunted. Choi encountered the goblin and suffered greatly. It's not just that people fear goblins, but the goblins also fear people. The fact that so few people they fear is the saddest part of all. Choi feared the goblins, which is why they troubled him. Imbang.
The Snake's Revenge. In ancient times, there lived an archer near the Water Gate of Seoul. He was a man of immense strength and was renowned for his bravery. The Water Gate is a hole in the city wall that allows the waters of the Grand Canal to flow out. It is fitted with iron bars to prevent people from entering or leaving through it. One afternoon, while the soldier was out for a walk, he spotted a large snake trying to pass through the water gate. The snake's head had already slipped through the bars, but its larger body was stuck. The soldier drew an arrow, aimed, and shot the snake in the head. The snake, fatally wounded, died. The archer then pulled it out, crushed it into a pulp, and left it there. Sometime later, the man's wife became pregnant and gave birth to a son. From the beginning, the child was terrified of his father and would cry and appear greatly scared whenever he saw him. As the child grew older, his aversion to his father only intensified. The man, suspicious of this behavior, began to dislike his son instead of loving him. One day, when it was just the two of them in the room, the officer decided to take a midday nap. He covered his face with his sleeve, but kept one eye on the boy to see what he would do. The child, thinking his father was asleep, glared at him, grabbed a knife, and lunged at him. The man reacted quickly, seized the knife, and struck the boy with a club, killing him instantly. He then crushed the boy's body into a pulp, left it there, and departed. The mother, in tears, covered the small body with a quilt and prepared for its burial. After a while, the quilt started to move. Alarmed, she lifted it, only to find that the child was gone and a huge snake was coiled up in its place. Terrified, the mother retreated from the room and never entered it again. In the evening, the husband came home and was told the horrifying story by his wife. He went in to see that everything had transformed into a massive snake. The snake's head bore the scar from the arrow he had shot. He addressed the snake. "We were not enemies to begin with, so I was wrong to shoot you. However, your plan to seek revenge by becoming my son was a terrible act. This situation proves that my suspicions about you were correct and justified. You became my son with the intention of killing me, your father, so why shouldn't I retaliate by killing you? If you try it again, I will surely take your life. You've already had your revenge and have once again returned to your original form. Let's forget the past and be friends from now on. What do you think?" He reiterated this and pressed his proposals, while the snake seemed to listen attentively with its head bowed. He then opened the door and said, "You are free to go now." The snake left, heading straight for the water gate, and slipped out between the bars. It did not reappear. Note: man is a spiritual being distinct from all other creatures. Although a snake has venomous power, it is still insignificant compared to a man. The snake died and took its revenge through the transmigration of its soul. Men die, but I have never heard of them transmigrating as the snake did. Why can't a spiritual being do what animals can? I have seen many innocent men killed, but none of them have ever come back to take revenge on the one who did it unlawfully. This makes me wonder even more about these snake stories. It is regrettable that the superior man knows nothing about the laws governing these things. Imbang.
The Brave Magistrate. In ancient times, in one of the counties of North Hamgyong province, there was a foul-smelling goblin that wrought havoc and death. Numerous magistrates arrived to confront the menace, but within days, each one succumbed to agonizing deaths, dissuading others from taking the post. Over 100 candidates were approached, yet all declined. Finally, a fearless soldier, lacking in social or political influence, accepted the challenge. He was resolute and undaunted, thinking, "Even if there's a devil there, not everyone will perish. I will test my mettle." Bidding farewell, he entered the yamen, finding himself alone as all others had fled. He kept a long knife at his side and remained vigilant, noticing from the first day a fishy stench that grew stronger. After several days, he observed a mist entering through the outer gate, emanating the putrid odor. Day by day, the stench became unbearable. When the appointed time for his demise approached, the yamen runners and servants who had returned fled again. The magistrate kept a jar of whiskey close, fortifying himself. On the fateful day, he became heavily intoxicated and awaited. Suddenly, he saw a figure shrouded in fog, 3 or 4 embraces wide and 15 feet tall, entering through the main gateway. It had no head, body, or arms visible, only terrifying rolling eyes atop. The magistrate sprang up, shouted, and struck it with his sword. Thunder cracked, and the apparition vanished. The foul odor disappeared instantly. Overcome by intoxication, the magistrate collapsed. The attendants, believing him dead, prepared for his burial. They noticed he lay in a different spot than previous victims. As they lifted him, he revived, glaring at them angrily. Fear and astonishment gripped them. From that moment, the foul smell never returned. The temple to the god of war, Yi Hangbok. When he was a child, a blind fortune teller predicted his future, saying, "This boy will be very great indeed." At the age of 7, his father assigned him the task of writing a verse on the harp and the sword, and he wrote, "The sword belongs to the hand of the warrior and the harp to the music of the ancients." At 8, he chose the subject, "The Willow Before the Door," and composed, "The east wind brushes the brow of the cliff and the willow on the edge nods fresh and green." Upon seeing a painting depicting a grand feast among the fierce Turks of Central Asia, he penned these words, "The hunt is off in the wild dark hills, and the moon is cold and gray, while the tramping feet of 1,000 horse ring on the frosty way. In the tents of the Turk the music thrills and the wine cups chink for joy, mid the noise of the dancer's savage tread and the lilt of the wild hot boy." At 12 years old, he was proud and haughty. He dressed well and was envied by the poorer boys in the area. Once, he took off his coat and gave it to a boy who looked upon him with envy. He also gave away his shoes and returned home barefoot. His mother, wanting to understand his actions, pretended to scold him. Yi Hangbok responded saying, "Mother, when others wanted it so, how could I refuse giving?" His mother pondered these things in her heart. By the age of 15, he was strong and well-built, enjoying vigorous exercise and becoming known for his skill in wrestling and shuttlecock. His mother disapproved, deeming these activities undignified, prompting him to focus on his studies. He graduated at the age of 25. In 1592, during the Japanese War, when the king fled to Uiju, Yi Hangbok accompanied him. There, he met the Chinese Ming representative, who remarked in surprise to the king, "Do you mean to tell me that you have men in Chosen like Yi Hangbok?" Yang Ho, the general of the rescuing forces, frequently sought his advice. Yi lived through the troubled reign of Quang Hai and eventually went into exile in Pukchong. As he crossed the Iron Pass near Wonsan, he wrote, "From the dizzy heights of Iron Peak, I call upon the passing cloud to gather the lonely exile's tears in its feathery shroud and let them fall as rain on the palace gates on the king and his shameless crowd. During the Japanese War in the reign of King Sanjo, the Ming dynasty sent a large army eastward, expelled the enemy, and restored peace. At that time, the Ming general informed the Korean king that their victory was attributed to the assistance of Quan, the god of war. Therefore, he said, you should not neglect to build temples to express gratitude to him. Accordingly, temples were constructed, one to the south and another to the east of the city. However, there was disagreement over the location of the southern temple. Some preferred it nearer the wall, while others wanted it farther away. Yi Hangbok, an official overseeing the deliberations, was at home one day when a military officer visited him. He was a robust and imposing figure. The officer requested Yi to dismiss all his attendants so they could speak privately. After they were alone, the officer delivered his message and departed. Yi had a close friend staying with him at the time, who had left with the servants but returned later. Seeing Yi's unusual expression, the friend inquired about it. Initially hesitant, Yi eventually confided that the visitor was no ordinary man, a messenger of the god of war. The purpose of his visit was to guide them in selecting the correct site for the temple. Yi explained that the decision was crucial not only for the present but also for future generations. Failure to choose wisely would disturb the god of war. Yi assured the messenger that he would do his utmost to resolve the matter. Upon hearing this, Yi's friend was deeply moved but was cautioned by Yi not to disclose the incident to anyone. Yi diligently pursued the matter, and eventually the temple was erected on the chosen site where it stands to this day, Imbang. The fearless captain. Once there was a soldier named Yi Manji from Yeongnam, known for his immense strength, courage akin to a lion, and a fearsome appearance with his green eyes. He often boasted, "Fear? What is fear?" One day, while Yi was at home, a sudden storm of rain accompanied by lightning and thunder erupted. During one particularly intense thunderclap, a large ball of fire crashed into his house, careening through the veranda, rooms, kitchen, and yard, even bouncing into the servants' quarters several times. Its blazing light and thunderous noise created a scene of terror. Yi remained unperturbed on the outer veranda, thinking to himself, "I have done no wrong, so why should I fear lightning?" Moments later, another lightning bolt struck a large elm tree in front of his house, shattering it to pieces. The rain and thunder subsided thereafter. Upon checking on his family, Yi discovered them all unconscious. With great effort, he revived them. Sadly, they fell ill and passed away within the year. Yi then moved to Seoul and rose to the rank of captain of the Right Guard. Later, he relocated to North Hamgyong Province, where he remarried and settled down. Previous occupants of his official residence there had succumbed to supernatural influences, leading others to avoid the place and use village houses instead. However, Yi resolved to confront any fear and return to the old quarters, extensively renovating them. One night, his wife was in the inner room while he was alone in the public office with a light burning before him. Around the second watch, a peculiar object emerged from the inner quarters. It resembled the stump of a tree wrapped in black sackcloth, lacking any distinct outline or shape. It hopped along and positioned itself directly in front of Yi Manji. Two other similar objects followed closely behind, forming a row before Yi, gradually edging nearer to him. Yi retreated until he was backed against the wall, unable to move further. He then demanded, "Who are you, and what kind of devil are you to approach me like this in my office? If you have a grievance or something to address, speak now, and I will attend to it." The middle devil replied, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry." Yi responded, "Hungry are you? Very well, step back and I will arrange plenty of food for you." He then uttered an incantation he had learned and snapped his fingers. The three devils seemed alarmed by this. Suddenly, Manji clenched his fist and struck at the first devil, but it evaded his blow skillfully, causing him to hit the floor hard and injure his hand. They all exclaimed, we'll leave, since you treat guests this way." Immediately, they hurried out of the room and vanished. The next day, he had oxen slaughtered and made a sacrifice to these devils, after which they never returned. Note, people have been killed by goblins not because goblins are inherently wicked, but because humans fear them. Many perished in North Hamkyong, but those who were brave and attacked them with knives or struck them down survived. If they had been afraid, they too would have died. Imbang. In Yunnan County, Wanghai Province, there was a certain scholar whose name I have now forgotten. One day he fell ill and remained in his room, leaning helplessly against his armrest. Suddenly, several spirit soldiers appeared to him, saying, "The governor of the lower hell has ordered your arrest." They bound him with a chain around his neck and led him away. They journeyed for many hundreds of miles until they reached a place with a very high wall. Inside the enclosure was a towering structure that seemed to reach the heavens. Upon entering, the spirits took him to a gate where they led him inside. In the inner courtyard, they laid him face down. When he glanced up, he saw what appeared to be a king seated on a throne, surrounded by attendant officers on each side. Scores of secretaries and soldiers moved about, busy with various tasks. The king's appearance was terrifying, and his commands were awe-inspiring. The scholar felt sweat break out on his back and dared not look up. After a moment, a secretary stepped forward to transmit questions from the king, who asked, "Where do you come from? What is your name? How old are you? What do you do for a living? Tell me the truth. No falsehoods." Trembling with fear, the scholar replied, "My clan name is so-and-so. My given name is so-and-so. I am this many years old, and I have lived for several generations in Yunnan, Wanghai Province. I am not naturally talented, so I have not achieved anything special. Throughout my life, I have heard that reciting prayers with love and compassion can save one from hell, so I have devoted my time to praying and giving to the needy." The secretary, upon hearing this account, promptly went to report it to the king. After some time, he returned with a message saying, "Come closer to the steps, for you have been mistakenly arrested due to sharing the same name. You are free to leave now." The scholar respectfully joined his hands and bowed deeply. Once more, the secretary conveyed another message from the king, saying, "My residence when I was alive was in a specific place and ward in Seoul. When you return, I wish to send a message through you. My stay here has been long, and my outer coat is worn out. Please ask my family to send me a new outer coat. I would greatly appreciate it if you ensure this is not forgotten." The scholar replied, "I will faithfully deliver your majesty's message as directed. However, the ways of the earthly world and the spirit world are so different that when I deliver the message, the recipients may think it nonsensical. Indeed, I will deliver it exactly as you command. But what if they refuse to listen? I should have some proof to substantiate my words." The king responded, "Your concern is valid. This will serve as proof. When I was alive, one of the buttons on my ceremonial attire had a broken edge. I concealed it in the 3rd volume of the Book of History. I alone know of its existence. No one else in the world does. If you mention this, they will listen." The scholar agreed. "That will suffice. But what should I do if they make the new coat?" The king instructed, "Prepare a sacrifice. Burn the coat, and it will reach me." With that, they bid farewell, and the king assigned 2 soldiers to accompany the scholar. As they departed, the scholar inquired about the figure seated on the throne. The soldiers replied, "He is the king of Hades. His surname is Pak, and his given name is O." Upon reaching a riverbank, the soldiers pushed him into the water. He suddenly woke up and realized that he had been dead for 3 days. Upon recovering from his illness, he returned to Seoul, located the indicated house, and meticulously verified the details, confirming it belonged to Pak-u. Pak-u had 2 sons who were already graduated and holding official positions. The scholar wished to meet the sons of the king of Hades, but the gatekeeper initially refused him entry. Helplessly waiting at the red gate until sunset, he was eventually approached by an elderly servant from the inner quarters. He earnestly pleaded to see the master. Upon receiving the request, the servant reported it to the master, who later granted him an audience. Upon entering, he encountered 2 distinguished gentlemen who appeared to be officials. They invited him to sit down and inquired about his identity and purpose. He replied, "I am a student living in Yunnan County, Wanghai Province. On such and such a day, I died and went into the other world, where your honorable father gave me such and such a commission." The 2 listened briefly, then, without waiting to hear everything he had to say, grew very angry and began to scold him, saying, How dare you, a scarecrow like you, come into our house and say such things? This is utter nonsense that you speak. Throw him out, they shouted to the servants. However, he called back saying, I have proof. Listen. If it fails, then you can throw me out. One of the two said, What possible proof could you have? Then the scholar told the story of the head button with great precision and care. Astonished, the two had the book brought down and examined, and indeed in volume 3 of the Book of History was the mentioned button. Not a single detail was incorrect. It turned out to be a button they had missed after their father's death, which they had searched for in vain. Accepting the message as true now, they all entered a period of mourning. The women of the family also called the scholar and asked him specifically about what he had seen. They made the outer coat, chose a day, and burned it before the ancestral altar. 3 days after the sacrifice, the scholar and the Pak family both dreamed that the king of Hades had come and thanked each of them for the coat. They kept the scholar in their home for a long time, treating him with great respect, and became his lifelong friends. Pak U was a great-grandson of Minister Pak Chom. While in office, he was honest and just, and was highly respected by the people. When he was mayor of Haiju, a dispute arose between him and the governor, which also proved Pak to be the honest man. When I was in Haiju, Choichom, a graduate, told me this story. Imbang.
Hong's experiences in Hades. Hong Naipom was a military graduate born in the year AD 1561 and resided in the city of Pyongyang. He passed his examination in the year 1603, and in 1637 he attained the 3rd degree. He was 82 years old in the year 1643, and his son San petitioned the king, requesting that his father be given a rank appropriate to his age. At that time, a certain Han Hongkil was the chief of the royal secretaries, and he refused to forward the request to his majesty. However, in the year 1644, when the crown prince was returning from his exile in China via Pyongyang, San seized this opportunity to present the same request to the crown prince. His Highness received it and brought it to the king's notice. Consequently, Hong received the rank of 2nd degree. Upon receiving it, he said, "This year I shall die," and he died shortly after. In the year 1594, Hong fell ill with typhus fever, and after 10 days of suffering, he died. His body was prepared for burial and placed in a coffin. Then, the friends and relatives left, and his wife remained alone in charge. Suddenly, the body turned itself and fell with a thud to the ground. The woman, frightened, fainted, and the other family members rushed to her aid. From this time on, the body resumed its functions and Hong lived. He said, "In my dream, I went to a certain region, a place of great fear where many people were standing around and terrifying ogres, some of them wearing bulls' heads and some with faces of wild beasts. They crowded around and jumped and pounced towards me in all directions. A scribe dressed in black sat on a platform and addressed me, saying, 'There are 3 religions on earth, Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. According to Buddhism, you know that heaven and hell are places that decide between man's good and evil deeds. You have always been a blasphemer of the Buddha and a denier of a future life, acting as though you knew everything, blustering and storming. You are now to be sent to hell, and 10,000 culpas will not see you out of it.' Then 2 or 3 constables armed with spears came and took me away. I screamed, 'You are mistaken, I have been wrongfully condemned.' Just at that moment, a certain Buddha, with a face of shining gold, approached me with a smile and said, 'There is indeed a mistake somewhere. This man must reach the age of 83 and become a 2nd-degree officer before he dies.' Then, addressing me, he asked, 'How did you end up here?' The order was to arrest and bring a certain Hong from Cheonju, not you. But now that you're here, take a look around before you leave and tell the world afterwards about what you've seen." Upon hearing this, the guards escorted me to a prison house where a sign marked "Stirrers of Strife" was posted. In this prison, I saw a large brazier-shaped pit, constructed of stones and filled with fire. Flames rose and tongues of fire forked. The Stirrers of Strife were brought forward and made to sit close to it. I then saw an infernal guard take a long iron rod, heat it until it was red hot, and use it to blind the guilty ones. I also saw that the offenders were hung up like dried fish. The guides accompanying me said, "While these individuals were on earth, they did not love their brethren but viewed others as enemies. They scoffed at God's laws and pursued only selfish gains, so they are being punished." The next hell was marked liars. In that hell, I saw an iron pillar several yards high with large stones placed in front of it. The offenders were summoned and made to kneel before the pillar. Then I saw an executioner take a knife, pierce the tongues of the offenders, pass an iron chain through each hole, and hang them from the pillar so that they dangled several feet from the ground by their tongues. A stone was then tied to each culprit's feet. With the stones weighing them down and the chains fastened to the pillar, their tongues were stretched out a foot or more, and their eyes rolled in their sockets. Their agony was horrifying. The guides once again said, "These offenders, when on earth, use their tongues skillfully to tell lies and to separate friends, and so they are being punished." The next hell was labeled deceivers. I saw numerous people there. Ogres were cutting flesh from their bodies and feeding it to starving demons. These demons continued to eat, and the flesh was continuously cut until only bones were left. When the winds of hell blew, their flesh regenerated. Then metal snakes and copper dogs swarmed in to bite them and suck their blood. Their screams of pain caused the earth to tremble. The guides told me, when these offenders were on earth, they held high office. They pretended to be honest and good while secretly accepting bribes and committing all kinds of evil. As state ministers, they exploited the resources of the land and drained the people's blood, yet they portrayed themselves as benefactors and received high praise. While they lived as thieves in reality, they pretended to be as holy as Confucius and Mencius. They deceived the world and were robbers, and so they are punished in this way. The guides then said, "It is not necessary for you to see all the hells." They decided to take me elsewhere to show me something, so we traveled some distance to the southeast. There was a large house with a sign that read, "The Home of the Blessed." As I looked, there were beautiful halos surrounding it and clouds of glory. There were hundreds of priests in cassocks and surplices. Some carried freshly bloomed lotus flowers, some sat in the posture of the Buddha, some were reciting prayers. The guides explained, "These individuals, when on earth, kept the faith and served the Buddha with undivided hearts. Thus, they have escaped the 8 sorrows and the 10 punishments and are now in the home of the happy, which is called heaven." After we had seen all these things, we returned. The golden-faced Buddha asked me, "Not many on earth believe in the Buddha, and few know of heaven and hell. What do you think of it?" I bowed deeply and thanked him. Then the black-coated scribe said, "I am sending this man away, see him safely off." The spirit soldiers escorted me, and while on the way, I woke up with a start and found that I had been dead for 4 days. Hong's mind swelled with pride because of this, and he often boasted about it. His age and second-degree rank came about just as the Buddha had predicted. Unfortunately, his experience was used as a means to deceive people, for the superior man does not speak of these strange and wonderful things. Yi Tan, a Chinese man from the Song Kingdom, used to say, "If there is no heaven, there is no heaven, but if there is one, only the superior man can attain it. If there is no hell, there is no hell, but if there is one, the wicked man must inherit it." If we examine Hong's story, while it appears to be a tale to deceive the world, it is actually a story to inspire righteous action. I and Bang have recorded it like Toi Chi saying, "Don't criticize the story, but learn its lesson." In Bang.
Haunted houses. There was once a man named Yi Chang in Seoul who often recounted his own eerie experiences. Being poor and homeless, he frequently stayed in borrowed accommodations and sometimes even ventured into haunted houses. Once, when he couldn't find a place to stay, he heard about a haunted house in Inktown at the foot of South Mountain, which had been abandoned for generations. Curious, Chang decided to investigate and eventually decided to move in. To determine if the rumors of haunting were true, he invited his elder brothers, Hugh and Haw, along with several relatives to help clean the house and spend the night there. The house had an upper room that was securely locked. Peering through a crack, they saw a table with a stand, an old harp without strings, worn shoes, and various sticks and bits of wood, nothing else. The room was covered in thick dust as though untouched for many years. After drinking wine, the group played games around the table, staying awake through the night. Towards midnight, they suddenly heard harp music and a cacophony of voices, though the words were indistinct. It sounded like many people feasting and celebrating. Alarmed, someone thrust a sword through the partition into the locked room. Instantly, a blue blade appeared from the other side, startling them. Frightened, they decided not to disturb the place further. The harp music and revelry continued until morning. At daybreak, they left the house and never dared to return. In another part of the South Ward, there was another haunted house that Chang wanted to investigate. Again, he gathered his friends and brothers to see if it was truly haunted. Upon entering, they found 2 dogs on the veranda, one black and one tan, with fiery red eyes. Despite their shouting, the dogs remained still and silent. However, at midnight, The dogs suddenly got up and began howling at the sky in an ominous manner, jumping around the courtyard. Around that time, a figure dressed in ceremonial robes appeared. The dogs joyfully greeted him, and he sat on the veranda. Soon after, 5 or 6 colorful demons appeared and bowed before him in the open space. Then the man led the demons and the dogs around the house 2 or 3 times. They rushed onto the veranda and then back into the courtyard. Back and forth they came and went until finally they all mysteriously disappeared. The devils went into a hole underneath the floor, while the dogs went back to their quarters and lay down. The people in the inner room witnessed this. When daylight came, they examined the area and looked through the cracks in the floor, but they only saw an old worn-out sieve and a few discarded brooms. Behind the house, they found another old broom wedged into the chimney. They ordered a servant to gather them up and burn them. The dogs remained motionless all day long, neither eating nor moving. Some of the group wanted to kill the animals, but were afraid due to their frightening appearance. That night, they stayed again to see if the same phenomena would occur. At midnight, the 2 dogs again came down into the courtyard and began barking towards the sky. The man in ceremonial robes appeared once more, along with the devils, just as the previous day. The group, filled with fear and disgust, left the following morning and did not attempt it again. A friend, upon hearing Chang's story, went and asked Hugh and Haw about it, and they confirmed the tale. There is another story about a scholar who was homeless and sought shelter in a haunted house in Inktown. It was rumored to have a tower where mysterious sounds were heard. They opened the door, broke the window, removed an old harp, a spirit chair, shoes and sticks, and burned them. Before the fire was finished, one of the servants collapsed and died. The scholar, alarmed, extinguished the fire, returned the items, and left the house in fear and dismay. Another homeless man tried it as well. In the night, a woman in a blue skirt descended from the loft and behaved strangely and unnaturally. Seeing this, the man gathered his belongings and departed. In South Kettletown, several woodcutters passed behind a haunted house early one morning and found an old woman sitting under a tree, weeping. Thinking her to be an evil spirit, one man approached from behind and struck her with his sickle. The witch hurried back into the house, appearing to be only about 1 cubit and a span tall. One of Korea's most famous generals who fought on behalf of China in 1628 against the Manchus. He is worshipped today in many parts of Korea. When Mr. Im Kong-up was young, he lived in the town of Talai. In those days, he loved hunting and constantly practiced riding and hunting. Once, he went on an excursion to track deer in the Wallach Mountains. He carried only a sword and pursued the animal on foot. In his pursuit, he ventured as far as Tai Pike Mountain. Night overtook him there, and the way was obscured by darkness. There were gaping chasms, towering cliffs, and dense forests all around. In his confusion, he encountered a woodman and asked for directions and guidance. The woodman pointed him towards a cliff on the opposite side, saying, "There is a house over there." Mr. Im followed the woodman's advice and crossed over to the distant ridge. As he approached closer, he discovered a large tiled mansion standing alone, with no other houses nearby. He entered through the main gateway, but found the interior dark and deserted. Clearly, it was an abandoned house. After spending the whole day in the hills, Mr. Im was filled with apprehension and a sense of foreboding. He viewed the place suspiciously, fearing it might be inhabited by mountain goblins or forest spirits. Suddenly, someone opened a door and called out, "Are you planning to spend the night here? Have you eaten anything?" Mr. Im looked and recognized the woodman who had earlier directed him. He replied, "I have not eaten anything and I am hungry." The woodman then opened a hidden compartment and brought out wine and meat. Mr. Im, being extremely hungry, consumed everything. They then sat down together to talk, and after a while, the woodman stood up again, opened the compartment once more and retrieved a large sword. Mr. Im asked, "What is this sword for? Are you planning to harm me?" The woodman laughed and said, No. Tonight, there is something remarkable happening. Would you like to come with me and not be afraid?" Mr. Im replied confidently, "Of course I am not afraid. I want to see." It was around midnight then. The woodman, holding the sword, led Mr. Im to a side path through a series of gates that seemed endless. Eventually, they arrived at a place where lights shimmered on a pond. In the middle of the lake stood a tall pavilion, illuminated from within. Laughter and voices emanated from the upper floors. Through the sliding doors, Mr. Im could see two people sitting together. Nearby, there was another pavilion and a large tree beside it. The woodman instructed Mr. Im to climb the tree. "When you climb up," he said, "take your belt, tie yourself securely to the trunk, and remain perfectly still." Im obeyed his instructions, ascended the tree, and secured himself. From his elevated position, he watched attentively. The first sight that met his eyes was the woodman leaping across the lake and landing in the pavilion. Immediately, the woodman climbed to the upper floor, where Im could now discern three individuals engaged in conversation and laughter. After drinking, the woodman said to his companion, "We've made our wager. Now let's see it through." His companion replied, "Let's proceed." They both stood, approached the entrance, and leaped into the air, disappearing from view. All that could be heard were clashes of steel and flashes of light, continuing for some time. Observing this from his perch in the treetop, Im shuddered and felt his hair stand on end. He was at a loss for what to do. Moments later, he heard a loud thud and a cry of triumph, recognizing it as the woodman's voice. Chills ran down his spine and goosebumps covered his skin. It took him a long time to regain his composure. He climbed down from the tree where the woodman met him, swiftly took him under his arm, and leaped back into the pavilion. There he encountered a beautiful woman with hair like clouds. Before the conflict, her voice had been joyful, but now she was overwhelmed with sorrow and tears. The woodman spoke harshly to her, saying, "Do you not realize that your actions as a wicked woman have led to the death of a great man?" Turning to Im, he continued, "You possess courage and bravery, but it is insufficient for a world such as this. Therefore, I will give you this woman and this house. You may bid farewell to the outside world and live here in peace and tranquility for the rest of your days." Im replied, "What I witnessed tonight bewilders me. I would like to understand its meaning first. Please enlighten me, and then I will consider your offer." The woodman replied, "I am no ordinary mortal. I am an outlaw of the hills and forests, a robber who has acquired many such houses through unlawful means. Across all provinces, I possess numerous homes, each with a beautiful woman and abundant riches. Unexpectedly, this woman betrayed me for another man, and both of them attempted to kill me. Regrettably, I had to kill him in self-defense. Although I should have punished her as well, I am offering you this place and the woman. Will you take them off my hands?" Im inquired. "Who was this man, and where did he live?" "He had great potential," replied the woodman. "Though he lived humbly near the south gate of Seoul, selling tobacco, he visited here often. I was aware of this, but turned a blind eye until their attempt on my life forced my hand. It was never my intention to kill him." Here the woodman broke down in tears. "Alas, alas," he lamented, "I have ended the life of a remarkable and talented man. Consider carefully," he urged Im. "You have courage, but not enough to leave a mark on the world. The fates have decreed your failure halfway through. Abandon your futile ambitions. Your name will never achieve renown. Follow my advice, accept this woman and this home." Im shook his head and said, "However, I can't do it." The woodman asked, "Why can you not?" "If you do not, there is nothing for this woman but death. So here I'll have done with it." And he struck her with his sword and cut off her head. The next day he said to Im, "Since you are determined to go forth and do valiantly, I cannot stop you. But if a man goes forth thus and does not know the use of the sword, he is helpless and at the mercy of the foe. Stay with me a little and learn. I'll teach you." Im stayed for 6 days and learned the use of the sword. The magic invasion of Seoul. One day, a gentleman from Seoul was crossing the Han River in a boat when he fell asleep and dreamed a remarkable dream. In his dream, he encountered a man with Gothic eyebrows and almond eyes, whose face was as red as ripened dates. This imposing figure, dressed in green with a long beard down to his belt, rode a red horse and carried a great sword by his side. The mysterious man instructed the gentleman to open his hand, upon which he marked it with a pen as a sign from the god of war. He warned him not to proceed directly to Seoul upon crossing the river, but to wait at the landing instead. Soon after, 7 horses loaded with network hampers would arrive, traveling towards the capital. The gentleman was to show the mark on his hand to the horsemen, causing them all to commit suicide in his presence. Then he was to pile up the loads without looking into them and report the matter to the palace urgently, ensuring the contents were burned without delay. Upon waking, the gentleman found the mark on his hand exactly as in his dream, the ink still wet. He followed the instructions meticulously, waiting by the riverbank. True to the dream, the 7 loads arrived from the south, escorted by attendants and an official. As advised, he showed them the mark, prompting the official and his companions to leap into the river in panic. The gentleman then instructed the boatmen to guard the hampers without opening or touching them, while he rushed to report the incident to the Board of War. Officials were dispatched to bring the loads into Seoul, where they were stacked high with wood and set ablaze. As the fire consumed the hampers, countless tiny figures of men and horses spilled out. The officials were horrified, realizing these were creations of a magician intended for a monstrous invasion of Seoul. Thanks to the warning from the god of war in the dream, disaster was averted. From then on, the people of Seoul faithfully made offerings to the god of war in gratitude for saving their city. Imbang. The Awful Little Goblin. A nobleman in Seoul hosted a celebration, inviting all his family friends to a grand feast. The gathering was large, with many men and women in attendance. Suddenly, a disheveled, unpleasant-looking boy of about 15 appeared in front of the women's quarters, assuming he was a servant accompanying one of the guests. The host and other guests did not inquire about him. However, one of the female guests, seeing him in the inner quarters, sent a servant to scold him and demand he leave. The boy, however, stood unmoving, prompting the servant to ask, "Who are you? With whom did you come? How dare you enter the women's quarters and refuse to leave when asked?" The boy remained silent, steadfast as before, offering no response. The company grew puzzled, wondering whose guest he might be. Despite repeated inquiries, he gave no answer. The women became increasingly angry and ordered him forcefully out. They tried to push him out, but he stood as firm as a rock, utterly immovable. Frustrated, they informed the men. Upon hearing this, the men sent several strong servants to remove him, but still he did not budge. They demanded, "Who are you?" But received no reply. Frustrated and angered, they sent 10 men with ropes to bind him, but he remained as steadfast as a mountain, showing he could not be moved by human strength. One guest remarked, "Yet he is human. Why can't he be moved?" Finally, they sent 5 or 6 robust men with clubs to strike him forcefully. They struck with all their might, the noise echoing like thunder. However, the boy remained unmoved, not flinching in the slightest. The crowd began to fear, believing him to be more than human, perhaps a god. They all entered the courtyard and began bowing before him, like praying earnestly with joined hands. This continued for a long time. Finally, the boy gave a sarcastic smile, turned around, walked out through the gate, and disappeared. Terrified, the company canceled the feast. From that day onward, illness struck the household, affecting both host and guests. Those who scolded, bound with ropes, and struck him died within days. Others who attended the feast also fell ill and died from diseases like typhus. It was widely believed that the boy was the Tuluk spirit, though this cannot be confirmed. Truly strange indeed. Note, when a clan's time to disappear arrives, calamity befalls it. Even if a great spirit enters through the door during a feast, if guests had followed Confucius' advice to be reverent and distant, rather than insulting him and provoking his wrath, they might have been spared. Devils and humans were never meant to dwell together. Imbang. God's Way. In a certain town, there lived a man of fierce and ungovernable disposition who, in moments of anger, used to beat his own mother. One day, after being subjected to such abuse, the mother cried out in agony, "O God, why do you not strike dead this wicked man who beats his mother?" After the beating, the son calmly strapped his sickle to his belt and slowly made his way to the fields, where he had agreed to help a neighbor reap buckwheat. The day was clear and serene, with a beautifully unobstructed sky. Suddenly, a small dark cloud appeared in the middle of the heavens, and soon after, the entire sky turned black. Thunder rumbled furiously, and rain poured down heavily. Villagers peered anxiously toward the field, where lightning bolts seemed to target a figure holding a raised sickle. Once the storm subsided, They ventured out to investigate and discovered the man who had mistreated his mother, now struck dead and torn apart. God takes notice of evildoers on this earth and administers justice accordingly. Let us be deeply mindful and reverent. Eerie. The perfect priest. There once was a priest named Namnu who had mastered the teachings of Buddhism. Whenever he owned clothing, he would willingly take it off and give it to those who were cold. His spirit was gentle without any rough edges. Everyone, whether high or low, rich or poor, called him by the nickname Softy. Whenever he saw someone sentenced to a flogging in the temple or the official yamen, Namnu would always beg to take the culprit's place. Once, during a grand function at Pagoda Temple, attended by many high officials, Softy was kneeling at the side, participating. He suddenly remarked to Prince Hong of Yonsan, "You are truly a great man." Hong replied, "What do you mean by great man, you impudent brat? Take that." And he boxed Softy's ear with his fist. Softy laughed and said, "Please, Hong, don't do that. It hurts. It hurts." Later, I was in the retinue of Prince Yi of Yunsong, with other high officials present, when we paused briefly near the temple. Softy was there, and he looked at Yi and said, "I know your face, but I have forgotten your name." Afterwards, he added, "Oh, I remember now. You are Yi Sokyong." The monastery priests who heard this familiarity were scandalized and rushed to apologize profusely to the prince, saying, "Softy is like this by nature. God made him so. Please, your excellency, forgive him." The prince pardoned him, and he was not disturbed. Yi Ryuk. The propitious magpie. People say that when a magpie builds its nest directly south of a home, the master of the house will be promoted in office. Once, King Taizong had a friend who was very poor and had failed in all his projects. After various fruitless attempts, he decided to wait until the king went out on procession and then sent a servant to build an imitation magpie's nest in a favorable location ahead of him. The king noticed it and asked the man what he was doing. In response, the man explained that according to tradition, when a magpie builds its nest directly south of a home, the master of the house promptly receives a promotion. Since his master had waited so long without success, he was building an imitation nest to bring about the promotion. The king took pity on him and immediately ordered his appointment. When I was young, a magpie built its nest in front of our home, but myself and other boys cut off the branch, causing the entire nest to fall to the ground with the young birds, their pitiful yellow mouths open. Feeling sorry and afraid they would perish, I hung the nest on a propitious site to the south on a nudi tree. There, all the young birds survived, thrived, and eventually flew away. That same winter, my father was promoted 3 degrees in rank and assigned to the office of the Prime Minister. Later, I built a summer house at Chongpa, and in front of the house, directly facing south, magpies built a nest in a date tree. A woman slave of mine tore it down and used it for fuel, but the magpies returned the following year and built anew. The year after that, in 1469, Yezhong ascended the throne, and once again I received a promotion. In the spring of 1471, magpies built their nest in a tree just south of my office. I chuckled and remarked, "Surely there is a spiritual power in the magpie, as people have said since ancient times, and as I have personally witnessed." Yiryuk. The old Buddha, Prime Minister Choi Yun-tak, was once mourning the passing of his mother. He traveled south with only 1 horse and a servant, passing through the county of Kairyong. At that time, several district magistrates had set up a tent by the riverbank, enjoying refreshments. Seeing Choi ride by without dismounting, they decided to teach him a lesson. They sent an attendant to capture Choi's servant and questioned him about his master. The servant replied defiantly, "Choi, the old Buddha." Perplexed, they demanded his real name. The servant persisted, "The old Buddha." Angered by his response, they chastised him for concealing Choi's identity and punished him severely. Eventually, the servant revealed he is called Choi the Buddha, but his real name is Yun Tok, and he is on his way to his country home in Changwon. Realizing their mistake, the magistrates were struck with fear. They quickly dismantled their tent, cleared their food, and rushed to apologize and seek forgiveness from the Prime Minister. The old Buddha was a revered nickname for this esteemed minister, known widely for his wisdom and stature. A wonderful medicine. Prince Chung had served as the first minister of the realm for 30 years, known for his integrity and now nearing 90 years of age. His son, Wal, was second in influence only to him, and both were highly esteemed during their era, receiving special favor from the king. One day, Prince Chung's home was suddenly besieged by goblins and devils. In broad daylight, these mysterious beings harassed visitors, snatching hats and throwing stones, causing chaos throughout the court. Fleeing from the disturbance, Prince Chung moved to another residence where he concocted a special medicine known as Salqui Wan, or kill devil pills, which he offered in prayer. Miraculously, from the time he began using this medicine, the goblins ceased their attacks. Now, after 5 or 6 years, there has been no reappearance of these malevolent beings. Prince Chung himself remains in good health, free from sickness. Yiryuk. Prince Ha possessed a slave who owned land and lived in Yangju County. This slave had a daughter named Mo, renowned for her unparalleled beauty. An Yun, a distinguished scholar, fell deeply in love with Mo and married her. Upon hearing this, Prince Ha was filled with rage, questioning how a slave could dare marry into aristocracy. He had Mo captured and brought back, intending to marry her off to one of his own servants. Mo, tearful and distressed upon learning of this, escaped over the wall and returned to Anne. Overjoyed, Anne welcomed her back, though they both knew the challenges they faced due to the prince's disapproval. Together, they vowed to die rather than be separated. Learning of Mo's return to Anne, Prince Ha sent his men to capture her once more. From that point on, Mo vanished from sight until she was found dead, hanging by her neck in a room. Months of grief weighed heavily on Anne. One early autumn night, as he walked home from the Confucian temple across Camel Mountain's ridge, the moonlit treetops shimmered around him. The world was silent and still, with no travelers in sight. Lost in thoughts of Mo, An spoke lovingly of her, when suddenly a faint sound of footsteps emerged from among the pines. He looked carefully and saw Mo, knowing she had long passed away, and recognized her as a spirit. Yet, consumed by his longing for her, he rushed to her side, grasped her hand, and asked how she had come there. But she vanished, overcome with sorrow, and cried out and wept bitterly. His grief became so overwhelming that he fell ill, and, unable to eat due to his anguish, he soon passed away from a broken heart. Kim Champan, An's cousin and my dear friend, often recounted this tale, as did Yu Hyo-jung, An's nephew by marriage. Yu Hyo-jung spoke of Mo's unwavering faithfulness, praising her commitment even in death. He said, "She remained faithful until the end. For a woman who, born as a slave and unfamiliar with formalities, ceremony, righteousness, truth, or devotion, it is indeed difficult to die. Yet for love of her husband, she maintained her purity and departed this life untarnished. Among the faithful throughout history, was there ever one as steadfast as Mo?" The renowned Meng. Minister of State Meng Sa-song once set out on a long journey dressed in plain clothes. Along the way, he sought shelter from the rain in a side pavilion where a young scholar named Wang Ewi-han was already present, deeply engrossed in reading the inscription board adorned with verses. After a while, Wang turned to the elderly man and remarked, "Well, Granddad, do you understand the essence of these verses?" Pretending ignorance, the renowned minister stood up and replied, "An old countryman like myself, how could you expect me to know? Please enlighten me." Wang explained, "These verses were crafted by great men of the past. They captured their observations and experiences to inspire future generations. Poetry, you see, contains vivid images akin to paintings of sea and land." The minister responded, "Indeed, that's remarkable. Without scholars like yourself, how would I ever grasp such insights?" Soon after, a procession of pack horses laden with various goods and accompanied by numerous servants and retainers arrived. Wang, astonished, inquired about this spectacle and discovered to his amazement that the old man was none other than Meng Sa-song himself. Unintentionally, he knelt down deeply in a gesture of profound respect. The minister chuckled and said, "That's enough. The worth of individuals lies not in their status, but in their thoughts. Unfortunately, all are born with pride. You, however, are no ordinary scholar. Why then be so proud earlier and so humble now?" He took Wang by the hand, guided him to a mat, comforted him, and bid him farewell. Yuk. The senses. The eyes are round like gems to roll and perceive. The ears have openings to hear. The nose detects smells through its passages. The mouth, with its horizontal slit, allows for breathing and speaking. The tongue, akin to an organ reed, facilitates speech and sound. 3 of these senses serve distinct functions, while the mouth serves dual purposes. However, it is the heart that distinguishes good from bad. Without the heart, even with eyes, one cannot see. Without ears, one cannot hear. Without a nose, one cannot smell. And without a mouth, one cannot breathe. Therefore, it is said that without the heart, seeing you cannot see, and hearing you cannot hear. Eerie. Who decides, God or the king? King Taejong of Korea was resting in Hongyang Palace when 2 eunuchs outside engaged in a debate about whether the affairs of men are governed by man or God. A argued, riches and honor are entirely in the king's hands. B countered, no, everything, from wealth to promotions, is determined by God alone. Even the king has no control or power over it. Their argument continued without resolution until the king, overhearing them, decided to settle the matter discreetly. He wrote a secret dispatch, ordering a promotion of 1 degree in rank for the bearer of the letter. A was initially tasked with delivering the dispatch to Sejong, the official in charge. However, A suddenly fell ill with severe stomach pain just outside the palace enclosure and asked B to take his place and deliver the letter instead. The following day, when the king reviewed the promotion records, he found that B had indeed been advanced as per his command, but there was no mention of A receiving any promotion. Perplexed by this discrepancy, King Taejong investigated further. Upon learning the circumstances, he was struck with profound wonder and remained lost in deep thought for a long while. Three things mastered. Im Sungjong, a relative of the king, was known for his exceptional talent and dedication. He was renowned as the foremost harpist of his time, so much so that King Sejong remarked, "Im's harp has only one master and follows no other." Living outside the South Gate, Im Sungjong engaged in peculiar practices that baffled onlookers. Every morning for 3 years, he could be seen kneeling at his doorstep, rhythmically beating his hands up and down on his knees. Many thought him mad, unable to fathom the purpose behind his actions. Little did they know he was mastering the movements necessary for playing the harp. In addition to this, Im diligently practiced blowing air with his mouth and manipulating his fingers day and night, completely absorbed in his pursuit. His focus was so intense that visitors would come and go unnoticed by him. This rigorous routine persisted for 3 years, through which he mastered the techniques required for playing the flute. Despite being of slight build and initially inept at riding and archery, Im Sungjong was determined to overcome these shortcomings. Lamenting his weaknesses, he declared, "Though I am weak and lack skill in long-distance shooting, I will learn to hit the target dead center. This, too, can be achieved through practice." Thus, every morning he ventured into the hills with his bow and arrows, tirelessly shooting throughout the day. After 3 years of relentless effort, he became a renowned archer. Im Sungjong's dedication and perseverance exemplify the kind of man he was, a person who pursued mastery in multiple disciplines through unwavering commitment and disciplined practice. Eerie. Strangely stricken dead. There was once a man named Kim Tok-sang, a soldier of fortune who had been particularly honored at the court of King Taejong. Throughout his career, Kim had been appointed generalissimo of the army multiple times, and during his campaigns, he was often accompanied by a close and beloved friend. Kim had been dead for over 10 years when one night, this friend awoke with a start and cried out loudly. After settling down, he soon fell asleep again, only to be disturbed by another frightful vision. His wife, concerned and puzzled, asked what was troubling him. The friend explained, "I just saw General Kim riding a white horse with a bow and arrows at his belt. He called out to me and said, 'A thief has just entered my home, and I have come to shoot him dead.' He then rode off. Shortly after, he returned, drawing an arrow from his quiver, and I noticed blood marks on it. He said, "I have just shot him. He is dead." The husband and wife, filled with fear and amazement, discussed the strange vision throughout the night. At dawn, the friend went to Kim's former home to inquire about the events. He learned that, on the very night of his vision, Kim's young widow had decided to remarry. As soon as her new fiancé entered the house, he was seized by a sudden excruciating pain. Before the night ended, he had died in great agony. The mysterious Hoi tree. Prince Basong's residence was located just inside the Great East Gate, with a large Hoi tree standing before it. One night, as the prince's son-in-law was passing along the road in front of the archer's pavilion, he saw a vast assembly of bowmen, too numerous to count, all shooting arrows at targets. Moments later, he observed them practicing various martial skills. Some were throwing spears, others were hurling bowls, and many were shooting from horseback, completely blocking the road. As he approached, some of the archers shouted, "Look at that impudent rascal! He dares to ride by without dismounting." They seized him, disregarding his pleas for mercy, and beat him mercilessly. Amidst his cries of pain, a tall figure emerged from the crowd and, with a commanding voice, said, "He is my master. Why do you treat him so?" The tall figure released him, took him by the arm, and led him back to the prince's gate. When the son-in-law turned to look back, he saw the tall figure walk under the Hoi tree and vanish. It dawned on him then that all the archers were spirits, not men, and that the tall figure who had come to his aid was also a spirit. This spirit had emerged from the very Hoi tree that stood in front of Prince Pasong's house. Ta Hong Sim Hoi Su, as a young man, studied under No Susin, who had been exiled to a distant island in the sea. He followed his master there and diligently worked on the sacred books. He enrolled in 1570 and graduated in 1572. In 1589, he courageously remonstrated with King Sonjo regarding the disorders of his reign, successfully calming a major national disturbance. However, he once made a social blunder when he jokingly remarked to a friend, "These seagull waves ride so high, who can tame them?" This comment was seized upon by others, leading to his unpopularity as it seemed to criticize the court unfavorably. In 1592, during the Japanese invasion when the king fled to Uiju, Sim Hoi-su served as the state's chief secretary. Upon the king's return, he was appointed chief justice. Despite attempting to resign multiple times, the king insisted he remain, stating, "I cannot do without you." Sim later became the head of the Literatai and a special advisor. He held positions as Minister of the Right and Minister of the Left, during which he presented 10 suggestions to the king. Observing injustices around the king, he resigned repeatedly but was consistently asked to return. In 1608, when Im Suk-yong wrote an essay exposing the court's wrongdoings, Sim Hoi-su protected him. The king, angered by the essay, initially ordered Im's punishment, but Sim intervened, declaring, "I stand by what he wrote, punish me instead," prompting the king to withdraw his anger. Sim Hoi-su was known for his unwavering loyalty. In his old age, he lived humbly in Tunsan, residing in a modest hut like the poorest Literatai. He referred to himself as Water Thunder Muddy Man, a name inspired by the Book of Changes. He passed away in 1622 at the age of 74, remembered as one of Korea's esteemed patriots. The story Minister Sim Hoi-su in his youth was as handsome as polished marble and as pure as snow, exquisitely and uniquely formed. By the age of 8, he had already mastered the art of calligraphy, earning admiration and wonder from his people. His nickname was Sundong, the godlike one. After passing his initial examinations, he steadily advanced in his career until he ultimately became the first minister of the land. In his old age, he was revered as the most distinguished of all ministers. Even at 70, he remained in office. One day, while engaged in state affairs, he suddenly said to those around him, "Today is my last day on earth. My parting wish for you all is that you may thrive and perform your duties bravely and well." His colleagues, surprised, responded, "Your Excellency, you are still robust and capable of many more years of service. Why do you speak in this manner?" Sim replied with a smile, "Our lifespan is predetermined. Why should I not know? We cannot exceed the destined limit. Please do not feel regret. Dedicate yourselves to serving His Majesty the King and express your gratitude for his many favors." With these words, he bade them farewell and departed. Everyone was astonished by this unusual declaration. From that day on, he did not return, with rumors circulating that he was unwell. At that time, a young secretary working in the War Office directly under Sim heard about his master's illness. Concerned, the young man went to visit and inquire about his condition. Sim invited him into his private room, which was peaceful and quiet. He said, "I am about to die, and this is a final farewell. Take good care of yourself and fulfill your duties honorably." The young man noticed tears in Sim's eyes and said, "Your Excellency, you are still strong. Even though you might be slightly ill, there seems to be no serious cause for worry. I do not understand your tears or your statement about impending death. May I ask the reason?" Sim smiled and said, "I have never shared this with anyone, but since you ask and there is no need for further secrecy, I will tell you the whole story. When I was young, some events in my life might seem amusing to you now. At around 16 years old, I was known as a handsome and striking boy. Once in Seoul, during a banquet filled with many dancing girls and lively festivities, I attended with a half-dozen friends. Among the dancing girls was a young woman whose beauty was extraordinary. She did not seem like an earthly being, but rather an angelic figure. When I inquired about her name, those seated nearby told me she was called Ta-hong, Flower Bud. After everything ended and the guests had left, I went home, but Ta-hong's lovely face lingered in my thoughts. I kept recalling her repeatedly. It seemed I couldn't forget her. About 10 days later, as I was returning from my teacher's house along the main street with my books under my arm, I unexpectedly encountered a beautiful girl. She was elegantly dressed and riding a fine horse. She dismounted right in front of me and, to my surprise, took my hand, saying, "Aren't you Sim Huisu?" In my astonishment, I looked at her and realized it was Ta-hong. I replied, "Yes, but how do you know me?" At that time, I wasn't married and my hair wasn't yet done up. With many people around on the street, I felt very embarrassed. With a joyful expression, Ta-hong said to her attendant, "I have something to attend to now. You go back and tell the master that I'll be present at the banquet tomorrow." Then we stepped aside into a nearby house and sat down. She asked, "Didn't you visit Minister so-and-so's house on such and such a day and attend the gathering?" I answered, "Yes, I did." "I saw you," she said, "and to me your face was like that of a god. I asked those around who you were, and they said your surname was Sim and your given name Huisu, and that your character and talents were exceptional. Since then, I've been longing to meet you, but it seemed impossible, so I could only think of you. Our meeting today must be fate." I laughed and replied, "I felt the same way about you." Ta-hong then said, "We can't talk here. Let's go to my aunt's house in the next district, where it's quiet." So we went to her aunt's house, which was tidy, secluded, and where her aunt treated her with motherly devotion. From that day onward, we pledged ourselves to each other. Ta-hong had never had a lover before. I was her first and only choice. She said, "But our plans cannot be realized today. Let's part for now and plan for our union in the future." I asked how we could do that, and she replied, "I've devoted myself to you forever, but you have to consider your parents, and you haven't chosen a wife yet. They won't agree to a wife of my status. Considering your abilities and future prospects, I can see you becoming a high-ranking official. Let's part for now, and I'll wait for you until you achieve first place in the exams and celebrate for 3 days. Then we can meet again. Let's make an unbreakable pact. So until you achieve your success, don't think about me, please. Don't worry about losing me either, as I have a plan to keep myself safe and hidden. Know that when you achieve your success, we will meet again." With a clasp of hands and words of farewell, we parted as if it were easy. I did not ask where she was going, but returned home with a heart heavy and distressed, feeling as though I had lost everything. On my arrival, I found my parents in a state of deep worry, having missed me. Yet they were so overjoyed at my safe return that they scarcely questioned where I had been. I offered them a different explanation instead. For a long time, I could not shake thoughts of Ta-hong. Only after much time passed did I regain my composure. From that moment, I dedicated myself entirely to my studies. Day and night, I labored, not for the sake of passing the examinations, but in the hope of meeting her again. About 2 years later, my parents arranged my marriage. I dared not refuse and accepted, though my heart was not in it, and I found no joy in their choice. My aptitude for study was exceptional, and through diligence I surpassed all my peers. It was 5 years after bidding farewell to Tahong that I achieved academic honors. Though still young, I enjoyed the world's praise for my success. Yet, my true joy lay in the hope that the time to see Tahong again had arrived. On the first day of my graduation celebration, I eagerly awaited her, but she did not appear. The second day came and went with no sign of her, and as the third day was passing, still no word reached me. My heart was restless, and I found no pleasure in the honors I had received. As evening approached, my father said to me, "I have an old friend who lives in Changi Ward. You must visit him this evening before the 3 days of celebration are over." With no other choice, I went to make the call. On my return, the sun had set, and it was dark. As I passed by a high gateway, I heard the call of the Silai, a custom signaling a noble household. It was the home of an old minister, someone I did not know. Being a person of high status, I had to dismount and enter. Inside, I met the master, an elderly gentleman who first had me perform the customary courtesies, then invited me to sit beside him. He spoke kindly and offered me various refreshments. Lifting his glass, he asked, "Would you like to meet a very beautiful person?" Uncertain of his meaning, I inquired, "What beautiful person?" The old man replied, "The most beautiful person in the world to you. She has been part of my household for a long time." He then summoned a servant to call her. When she arrived, it was my lost Tahong. I was stunned, overjoyed, and almost speechless. "How are you here?" I asked in amazement. She laughed and said, "Is this not within the 3 days of your public celebration, as we agreed upon our parting?" The old man added, "She is a remarkable woman with high and noble thoughts, as her story is quite extraordinary. I am an old man of 80, and my wife and I have had no children. One day, this young girl came to us and asked, 'May I serve you as a slave, to wait on you and fulfill your needs?'" In surprise, I asked why she made this strange request. She replied, "I am not fleeing from any master, so please do not mistrust me." Nevertheless, I hesitated to take her in and expressed my reluctance. However, she pleaded so persuasively that I relented and allowed her to stay. I assigned her tasks, observed her behavior, and she willingly became a servant, dedicated to pleasing us. She prepared our meals during the day, tended to our rooms at night, responded promptly to our calls, and eagerly fulfilled our requests. Her loyalty was unparalleled. As elderly individuals often ailing, she brought us unprecedented comfort and joy, making our lives peaceful and content. Her needlework was remarkably skilled, and she provided all our seasonal needs. Naturally, we grew to love and pity her deeply. My wife cherished her more than a mother cherishes a daughter. She was always by our side during the day and slept near us at night. At one point, I gently inquired about her past. She disclosed that she was originally the child of a freeman, but her parents had passed away when she was very young. Without a place to go, an elderly woman from the village took her in and raised her. Because of my youth, she explained, I was sheltered from harm. Eventually, she met a young master with whom she pledged her troth for 100 years, a handsome boy like no other. She resolved to reunite with him after he achieved honor in the arena. Feeling unsafe at her old home and fearful of losing her honor, she sought refuge with us to serve and protect herself. Her plan was to remain hidden for a year or so, then seek our permission to leave once he achieved his triumphs. Curious, I asked who this person was with whom she had made this pact. She revealed your name to me. Although I am too old to consider taking on wives or concubines, she referred to herself as my concubine to ensure her safety. Thus, the years passed. We anxiously followed the examination reports, but your name never appeared until now. Throughout it all, she showed no signs of anxiety, maintaining her optimism that your name would eventually emerge. Her confidence was unwavering, and not a trace of disappointment clouded her face. When I finally found your name on the list, I informed her. She received the news calmly, as if expecting it all along. When we parted, she recalled, I promised to meet him before the public celebrations ended within 3 days. Now I must fulfill my promise. She climbed to the upper pavilion to watch the procession, but being somewhat distant from the main path, she missed seeing you on the first and second days. This morning she returned, certain that you would pass by today. True to her belief, you did. "He is coming," she declared. "Bring him in." I am an elderly man, well versed in history, familiar with stories of many extraordinary women. I have encountered numerous instances of loyalty and devotion that stir the heart, but none as faithful and devoted as hers. Recognizing her dedication, God has fulfilled all her aspirations. Now, to savor this moment of joy, you must stay with me tonight. When I first met Ta Hong, I was incredibly happy, especially upon hearing of her years of faithfulness. Regarding the invitation, I declined it, stating that I couldn't bring myself to take her away, even though we had agreed on it, considering she was attending to His Excellency. However, the old man laughed and said, "She isn't mine. I simply let her be called my concubine in name to prevent my nephews or other younger clan members from taking her away. Above all, she is a faithful woman whom I have never seen the like of before." The old man then spake the horse and the servants, along with a letter to my parents informing them that I would be staying the night. He instructed the servants to prepare a room, set up beautiful screens and embroidered matting, hang up lights, and decorate as if for a bridegroom. Thus he celebrated our meeting. The next morning, I bid farewell and went to tell my parents all about meeting Ta Hong and what had transpired. They agreed that I could marry her, and she was brought into our family, becoming my only wife. Her life and conduct surpassed the ordinary. She served those above her and assisted those below, fulfilling all the requirements of ancient principles. Her work was performed faithfully, and her talents in music and chess were exceptional. I loved her deeply, beyond words. A while later, I was appointed magistrate of Kyeomsan County in Chula Province, and Ta Hong accompanied me there. We spent 2 years there together. She declined our frequent happy times together, citing interference with efficiency and duty. One day, unexpectedly, she approached me and requested a private moment, saying she had something important to tell me. I asked her what it was, and she said, "I am going to die, for my time is up. Let us be happy once more and forget all the world's sorrows." I was astonished to hear this. I couldn't believe it was true, and asked her how she knew she was going to die. She replied, "I just know. There's no mistake." In 4 or 5 days, she fell ill, though not severely, and yet a day or 2 later, she passed away. As she lay dying, she said to me, "Our life is ordained by God. He decides everything. While I lived, I gave myself to you, and you responded with great kindness. I have no regrets. As I depart, I only ask that my body be buried where I can rest beside you when your time comes, so that in the afterlife we may be together once more." With these words, she breathed her last. Her face remained beautiful, unlike that of the deceased, but resembling that of the living. I was overwhelmed with grief and personally prepared her body for burial. According to our customs, a second wife is not interred with the family, but I made excuses and laid her to rest in our family plot in Koyang County, fulfilling her final wish. On my sorrowful journey, when I reached Kyeomchang, I composed a verse. "O beautiful bud of the beautiful flower, we bear your form upon the willow bier. Where has your sweet perfumed soul flown? The rains fall upon us to recount your tears and your faithful way." I wrote this as a tribute to my beloved Ta Hong. After her passing, whenever something significant was to occur in my household, she would appear beforehand in a vision, and her predictions never failed. This continued for several years until a few days ago when she appeared in a dream and said, "Master, your time to depart has arrived and we shall reunite. I am preparing for your joyous arrival." That is why I have bid farewell to all my associates. Last night she visited me once more in a dream and said, "Tomorrow is your day." In the dream, we met, talked, and wept together. When I awoke this morning, tear marks still adorned my cheeks. It is not because I fear death, but because I have seen Ta Hong again. Now that you have asked, I have shared everything with you. Do not speak of this to anyone. And so, as predicted, Sim passed away the following day. Truly a remarkable tale.